Hello and welcome to episode 38 of the 6 Pixels Under podcast. I'm nerdSlayer, your host, of course. Another day, another time, another podcast, same fedora, but I'm definitely going to work on that. Need to get another one, maybe a red one, maybe something snazzy like a Vice cop, like a Vice detective. You guys ever play LA Noire? Remember the Vice scenes whenever you get upgraded to Vice? Really good game, but just unfortunate reality that mystery games are really hard to do. Anyway, welcome everybody to this week's podcast. It is the 17th of June and about 11 o'clock my time, 12 p.m. everybody else's time mostly. And then for my European listeners, probably, 8, 9 p.m. over there, getting a little bit later. So I thank you all from all over the globe for joining me today. On this week's podcast, we have a lot of stuff to talk about, but I'm going to try and work through it in our normal time frame of about 2 hours or so. So the first thing I want to get out of the way is we're going to, of course, have our current gaming topics section. On this week's podcast, we'll talk about the state of the Anthem subreddit. There's been some interesting revelations in that respect. Keanu Reeves was blown away by the fan reaction at E3. If you haven't seen that already, that was just pretty crazy. And then we had Nintendo announce that Zelda Breath of the Wild is getting a sequel. That's been pretty unique, and I don't think we've really seen that before with Zelda, if you don't count maybe a couple, examples, say for example, like Super Nintendo or the original Zeldas. I think there was a sequel, but I can't remember off the top of my head. We will also talk about GOG's quest to unite all game launchers. At least that's what the article says, which is a pretty damn good article name. Apparently they're working with Microsoft already, so maybe GOG is looking for a way to become a big player in the platform publishing market, whatever you would like to call it. Let's call it platform wars. Maybe they're looking to erect a new position and actually be able to compete potentially with Valve or Origin or any of these other platforms out there, Epic, etc. And then after that, after we talk about the current news, we will talk about we've renamed the MMO powwow to just something easier that rolls off the tongue. And that's going to be the MMO Roundtable. The MMO roundtables, think of it as like a weekly council meeting of passionate but diverse MMO fans, open to any and all, essentially. We tackle a week the subject for group discussion, and this week's weekly topic is going to be, what do you think is a feature that is underutilized in MMOs that should be utilized? And which feature do you think is sort of overused? So I'll post that in chat so everybody remembers that question. Remember, you can join the Discord, the podcast lobby. Currently, Card is not here today. He couldn't make it, and so you'll have to just bother me. But if you'd like to ask me any questions at any time, just feel free to @ me in chat or even @ me in Discord, and I'll make sure to get to those questions at the end during the call-in segment. But if you'd like to join for the MMO Roundtable, which I will get to after I do the current gaming news, then I would go ahead and join Discord and make sure to have a mic, of course, because we're going to do this over Discord voice. But before we get to that point, I wasn't even going to mention this. In fact, I wasn't even going to talk about it today. But man, have you guys seen the drama over there at Anthem subreddit? I big Reddit fan. I browse Reddit a lot. In fact, I get a lot of my news from Reddit. And I saw something that just caught my eye. And it was Anthem's Reddit cracks down on aimless, quotations, criticism. So Justin Olivetti of Massively OP pointed this out, and it says right here, it's so bad apparently that the community Reddit has taken to drastic censorship to keep complaints and criticism of the multiplayer shooter to a bare minimum. If you haven't followed Anthem's story at this point, I'm not going to do the whole backstory to catch everybody up, but just know that it's a game that's been in trouble since before it even launched. When it was announced originally, it's had a bit of a development hell. And, recent news came out that their roadmap kind of got switched around, and maybe there's not really a roadmap anymore. Maybe it's just more fixes, aka potentially them abandoning the game because it's not going to make them as much money anymore. However, with Anthem, the most interesting thing about this is it's like whenever you get really criticized over the way that you handle a launch or the way that you think of No Man's Sky. Think about the amount of crap that No Man's Sky went through. The reason why No Man's Sky is different than Anthem is that Anthem kept staying in the press. I felt like No Man's Sky, after a certain point, I think the developer was just like, hey, we screwed up. Here's how it is. And then they just kept quiet while they fixed it. The problem with Anthem, in my eyes, is that you're getting these constant trickle of more and more drama. So people are getting tired of the story in a way. It's becoming tiring. People are already labeling the game as dead and all of that stuff. But it's also, to go into this, I mean, let's just go click on the subreddit ourselves and read through this. This is the kind of stuff that really is a death knell or a death blow to a already dying game. Whenever you have a moderation team or some type of forum team that's trying to actively censor people who are criticizing things, it's pretty much always an indication that things aren't going very well. And let's just go ahead and read through some of this. Hello, freelancers. We know it's been a while since our last update. We've been discussing things behind the scenes and want to address some of the sources of frustration in our subreddit. Thank you for your patience. All right, so the first topic that they outlined was popcorn mentality. We've added an addition to rule number 1 about popcorn mentality that's been a problem in our subreddit for a while. Popcorn mentality is expressing a desire to watch drama unfold instead of engaging with the community in good faith. Welcome to Twitter. Welcome to Reddit. Welcome to the forums for the past 20 years I've been on them. And welcome to the internet, in fact, where many people have no desire to engage in a good faith argument. And if you're not familiar with what good faith argument means, think of it as like this. Like, is somebody trying to argue with you and actually understand your perspective, or actually trying to understand the problem at hand? Or are they more so talking past you, or maybe just trying to get you like a gotcha moment, like you suck, or you smell, or whatever, I don't know, whatever it is, right? Instead of having to engage in an actual good faith argument, which is kind of backed up by evidence, maybe people take time to explain their position and that sort of stuff. They're stating here that this popcorn mentality is very toxic, and they're essentially banning it, which is the idea of just wanting to watch drama unfold instead of engaging with the community in good faith. It's just, at this point, I mean, come on, guys, like, it's the internet. Like, people do this. I'm not saying it's a good thing, and here at, my channel and my community and really our community, the biggest thing that I think I like to talk about that sets us apart is that we are a community who's essentially used to arguing. All of us are used to arguing. We're used to having discussions. We're used to having disagreements, and that's totally fine. We can be friends, and we can totally disagree at what game is shit. We can totally disagree at what model is the best, and maybe for today's, weekly topic for the MMO roundtable, we can talk about which features are overused, which are underutilized, and that sort of stuff. And it's something that, in order to understand that there is going to be good faith, I totally understand that desire, right? Wanting good faith in an argument is very important, because otherwise it's just going to end up being ad homs and all of that sort of stuff. That's a big reason why we have rules here on our Discord and our Twitch channel, YouTube, you name it, on all of our platforms. And our rules are pretty simple. The number one rule I always like to mention to people, though, that a lot of these places don't have, and if they did have, they could fix a lot of these problems without having to worry about censoring people. It's that you need to make people actually qualify their positions or their criticism. So if this, subreddit moderator team decided to, I don't know, take that idea, which I'm totally willing to give to them, why not just do something like that instead of just being like, hey, anytime it's popcorn mentality, we're going to shut it down? Because, I mean, that essentially is completely opinion-based. What is popcorn mentality? At what point do you consider something good faith and not good faith? There's a lot of questions to be had there, but let's go ahead and move on to the next. A reminder about our rule on calling people out. Please stop asking people to be fired. I think that's totally fine. I think that's very fair. This is unacceptable, full stop. Game developers are members of our community. Most importantly, they are human beings. While you're free to criticize BioWare and EA, they respect. Yeah, but this is just a no-brainer that a lot of people don't kind of get. And here is the article itself, just so people can follow with me. Sorry about that. Remind me, guys, if I never give you guys the materials that I'm looking at. That's a pet peeve of my own. This is a thing that happens a lot in game development. People want to make it personal and want to blame it on developers all the time, right? They always want to say, oh, it's a developer's fault. It's this guy's fault. It's that girl's fault. Like, people want to blame one person. That's just kind of how human nature works. The thing that we highlight a lot on the Death of a Game series is that things are never so simple as just, one person. It's never one person's problem. In the case of BioWare and their work on Anthem, I'm almost like 100% sure it was not one person. In fact, that's exactly what was already said and what was already leaked by Jason Schreier and a couple of his contacts at BioWare, where they essentially said that nobody wanted to take fault, which is the opposite of being able to blame somebody, right? It essentially means everybody is sharing the blame because nobody wanted to step up. And that's kind of like a problem of leadership, frankly speaking. A leader, oftentimes, yes, they get paid more. Yes, they're kind of annoying. And yes, they can boss you around. But at the end of the day, a leader is also supposed to be the one who takes that step forward and is willing to take the risk, right? So the reason why I'm interested in, say, for example, Camelot Unchained is because Mark Jacobs was like, hey, here's my past, here are the things I messed up on. I want to do it right, and I want to do a game for this generation and my specific audience. I respect that ability to put yourself out there, again, especially after you had a failure, say, for example, in Warhammer Online, and also be able to be like, hey, this is just the strength of my character. If you disagree with me, if you don't like my game, you can dislike it, but I'm still putting myself out there. Anthem never really had that lightning rod. So I feel like maybe a lot of people who don't deserve any criticism, you know, maybe like an artist or something, is getting criticism when maybe they otherwise shouldn't have. So I blame that as a failure of leadership, frankly speaking. As a leader, I would rather take all of the blame than have everybody blame my like subordinates, right? Because ultimately it is my fault. I mean, I'm working on the project. I was leading them. I'm supposed to put them in the right positions in order to make the right decisions, right? The next one here is content restrictions and additions. No more screenshots and pictures and photos of pricing of Anthem. I mean, I can get that one because, yes, they can be clickbaity. But once again, are you arguing against criticism against Anthem? Are you just complaining about the internet? Because, I mean, it's kind of complaining about the internet. You're telling me Black Desert Online and ArcAge doesn't get memed to death about its, you know, microtransactions? Of course it does. I meme them to death. But it's just like, at one point, again, who is the arbiter of this thing? Who is deciding if something is considered clickbaity, or if certain price or screenshot or picture of a particular piece of information is considered worthy enough? Now, if you're wondering, oh, but maybe this just kind of doesn't mean a whole lot. Somebody in the comments said that they tried to post this exact article, and this exact article didn't work. And here we go. See, it says, the funny part, Anthem the Game subreddit simply blocked the link to this article. It's like they're allowing only negative content about the game there. Now, I don't know about that last conclusion, but I noticed that he said that it wasn't allowed on their subreddit. So, I mean, even a thread just highlighting the, you know, criticism is maybe not necessarily allowed there, which is already, you know, I have my problems with that. Let's get through a couple more of these because I wasn't going to spend all my time here, but I'm just showing to you guys kind of the thought processes of people who are essentially in desperation mode. Okay? At this point, it's not people criticizing things that's hurting anybody's feelings. Is the popcorn mentality, is calling people out and our content restrictions, do any of this have anything to do with maybe the state of Anthem? Obviously not at all. But this is like a following or a follow-up, right? Because of I guess I would say because of just the mishandling of the project, but also EA kind of not really taking it so gracefully either. Their failures of Anthem so gracefully. I think that this reminds me of whenever I would be at MMO forums right before they would shut down. This is the kind of stuff you would see. All of a sudden, the moderation team would start to kind of put things under wraps and maybe don't want to have certain discussions, and maybe you bring up statistics and they don't even want to talk about that. And it's just like, I talked to a couple guys on the forum. Sorry, I always call it the forum, but I mean the Discord. I grew up on the forums, guys, so I always call Discord the forums. It's always going to be the forums plus IRC combined to me. That's what Discord is in a nutshell. But one of the topics I discussed last week in my Discord was actually the topic of, and this is a little bit off topic for a bit, but it's the topic of like online games and kind of how they're essentially living entities, right? They need a constant population base in order to continue to function properly. So say, for example, an MMO that's massive and it's a sandbox game only has 100 players. Obviously, there's nothing close to what a sandbox game would need to function properly. I know from experience. Playing lots of Darkfall that had like 100 people playing. It doesn't matter. Past a certain point in those games, if you don't have enough people playing, the game just doesn't function in the same way. Now, one of the rhetorics that I see a lot, this kind of rhetoric drives me crazy. And this is actually, the original topic was concerning Classic WoW. And somebody brought up the point of, I want to look at the statistics and the population numbers after Classic WoW to see how well it's doing. And I saw one of the top comments say, I don't want that. I just want to play and enjoy the game. And I, like, at first glance, people were like, yeah, and they upvote it and they're all happy and stuff. And then I remember being on the actual forums before these games actually died, right? So, being on the forum for many of these games and seeing kind of the processes that they went through whenever they were living and dying and going through their first month of launch, and after a couple of months and maybe after a year, they're no longer doing so well. The number one thing I noticed was that rhetoric. People having that rhetoric where they would say things like, I don't care how many people are playing. I love this game. I don't care about the population. I love this game. Microtransactions, it's not that bad. They need to support the game. It becomes this like essentially all-seeing like prophecy where it's like, because you want to play the game so bad, you don't care about the business model. You don't care about the statistics. You want to ignore any reality, right? Any evidence that essentially it's a bad investment or you no longer want to keep putting in time, right? For some people, it ends up being like what's called a sunken cost fallacy. So a lot of people put time into a game. They don't want to, they don't want to just say like it was for nothing, right? For many people, they don't want to just be like, oh, it was fun. They want to feel like, no, I put all this time into this and it really meant something to me. MMORPG and forgetting the first month. Yeah, I know. I have heard it is hard growing up in the forums. Tough place, lots of crime and such. I mean, you might be memeing, but it very much was exactly what you described. That's where I learned a lot of like online crime was the forums. I also learned that height was a big thing on the forums, like for usually men to women relationships. I learned that height was like some big thing, and I learned what virgins and chads were, and had never known what that was until the forums. And frankly speaking, back in the forums, those terms were hardly used. These days, they're used like every single day in like nearly every discussion that you have about any kind of memes. I think that, I mean, there's nothing else really to cover here, but it's just the rhetoric of people that kind of have this like la 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 mentality where they just want to stick their fingers in their ears and then just say la 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 over and over again and ignore any kind of reality. And I get it hurts whenever your game dies. Been there. In fact, many of my favorite games have died. However, ignoring reality is not a solution. It's just a delusion. So like if you ignore that statistics aren't looking so good for your game, then you're going to run into a problem. The other thing that I'll highlight is that by essentially telling people that you don't care about getting population data and statistics and different things like that, you're telling developers that you don't care. And so that's another rhetoric that I just want to see squashed out. Is I feel like, personally speaking, if I'm going to put money and time into a game, I think they should release their numbers. That's just my opinion. Am I kind of off base here, guys? What do you guys think? I've always been a firm believer that if I'm going to play an online game and I'm going to pay a subscription, can you release the numbers to me so I at least know what I'm kind of getting into here? Why don't they? And I'm not going to leave it as simple as why don't they? I really want people in chat to think about this, because I see this kind of rhetoric a lot as well, where people will talk about populations and they'll be like, well, there's no data, so all of the evidence that you presented, it's completely like off because they didn't actually release the data. It's like, well, they didn't release the data, so I'm trying to get the evidence in order to kind of like extrapolate what that data meant. So, long story short, if they just told me what the numbers were, well, then it wouldn't be so hard. And in fact, if every developer was just honest with me, then it wouldn't be so hard to talk about these games. It wouldn't be hard to talk about maybe the problems with them. It doesn't work like that. That's pretty much a fantasy, kind of situation. Developers and publishers will not give me population data. What incentive do they have to do that? So I can make a death of a game whenever I find out that nobody's playing their game anymore, and so then more people don't really want to play their game. It's just like you have to think about it from the perspective of also the business. And so I personally believe and would very much enjoy the ability to see how many people are playing a game. But I totally get why that's just like a terrifying thing for many prospects or many investors or publishers, whatever you would like to call them. It can be a self-fulfilling prophecy when people see a low pop on a server. And I think so too. And that's just the nature of online games, right? It's kind of like, you guys ever been to a small town and just been like, man, not a whole lot going on in this town, where it's like, if it's a small town, oftentimes it's not going to have a lot going on, right? It's not going to have the resources or the same hoopla or places of interest that maybe some of the other places have because of money, right? So I know people don't like to think about population, and you want to keep playing your favorite games even when they're starting to die. But never forget that population does and always will matter. So you can close your ears as much as you want and say la la la, but the population of your game does matter, because it essentially means how much money they're making from the game, and is it profitable to keep, doing it, to keep going forward. The next topic I'd like to get to is I'm not going to go into it too much just because it's been covered a lot, but I thought it was pretty entertaining watching the E3 segment with Keanu Reeves, considering CD Projekt Red or Cyberpunk 2077. And obviously he had a big, huge ovation. If you haven't seen the video already, I don't think we're going to watch it on stream, but please go watch this video. It's pretty, and this is not the one that I'm talking about, but watch the one wherever he's on stage. I've never seen quite a strong fan reaction in some time for an actor in that sense, but it's obvious to see why you get such a thing with Keanu Reeves. He's kind of always been inextricably linked with video games and video game culture. You know, in my eyes, ever since he did Matrix, he kind of was always like around in that sense. And so we, as gamers, have always considered him to be one of the cool actors, if you will. But also other things, of course, that I love to highlight about him is that Keanu Reeves is a guy who takes the time to actually learn the stunts and learn the martial arts for the stunts that he's trying to do. So he's pretty legit in that respect too. I think that there's a lot to learn from people like Keanu Reeves in game development. It's kind of like one of the things that I'll mention to people is if you're not, say for example, like a really, really good fighting game player, then you're not somebody who's typically going to tell other fighting game players how fighting games work typically, right? Or you're not going to like have some big negative critique of it if you don't necessarily know how those kind of games work. I think it's been interesting to watch this whole Keanu Reeves thing unfold for me, just obviously as a random passerby, but also just because I've always wondered, and this is gonna catch many of you off guard, why the hell doesn't he play Spike Spiegel? Okay, that's really the only reason why I wanted to bring this up today. It's like, why doesn't Keanu Reeves just play Spike Spiegel and just get it over with? I mean, what are we waiting on here? All right, next topic. Nintendo did the unthinkable, really, and decided to do a sequel to Zelda Breath of the Wild. And this is the first time I've seen a Zelda sequel. I do believe there is one that's like back in the early 90s or whatever it is, whenever Super Nintendo came out or the original Nintendo came out. But they've decided to do a sequel. And although I don't cover a lot of Zelda content on my channel, I like to cover really anything that's interesting to me. I love the Zelda franchise, and I also think it's very interesting. And I've heard a lot of, you know, very interesting kind of tidbits released about this. Now, obviously, many people are going to point out that, is Zelda Breath of the Wild any close to actually being complete? Probably not. I mean, at most, it's probably like a year and some change away from being completed, right? Which has some people annoyed. Why even show it at E3? I get that, but I mean, come on. Elder Scrolls. Elder Scrolls did that and then some, right? I mean, they announced the game before they probably even like finished the art on it. But there's been some interesting kind of rumblings about this sequel. People have been bringing up Majora's Mask and maybe saying, let me see if I can find it here. I think someone said it down. Here we go. This guy says, the teaser was incredible, just to end on that with no hard information. It feels like they're pulling another Majora's Mask. Looks much darker. Cannot wait. And obviously, if you haven't already seen the trailer, it's pretty short, as you expect from such trailers. And it kind of, I personally think, has a little bit of spoilers in it. But, I mean, I guess at this point, many people, you've either already played the game or kind of already know, like, the general idea, which is that Zelda, the female princess, and then you have Link, who is not named Zelda, who's the main protagonist, right, who pretty much never talks, and he protects Zelda. And then obviously you have this evil force, Ganon. And here's the evil force coming in. This, I don't know why people mentioned Majora's Mask. With the shading here, this looks a lot more like Twilight Princess, with this dark kind of shading here. For those wondering why I take the time to talk about this, Majora's Mask is one of my favorite games of all time. And I also think it's probably, in my opinion, the best Zelda game. Now, obviously, I know many people would disagree because Ocarina of Time has a legion of fans and is one of the first games to probably be inducted into like a Hall of Fame of sorts, just because it's, you know, typically considered that legendary. But I really liked Majora's Mask, and if we can just talk about game design here for a second, the thing that I like the most about Majora's Mask is kind of the things that, you know, have been lacking in a lot of MMOs currently. And it's just risk. It's risk, it's reward, and it's progression. In Majora's Mask, there is a long-term progression system in the form of masks, essentially. If you get all of the masks, you can turn them in at the end for like grown-up Link, as we used to call it. And I don't remember the exact name of that form is. But then you get to fight the in-game bosses with like some souped-up character, and it's like way easier. Anyway, that game has a time mechanic where you have 3 days in which you can complete the game. And you're wondering, how can I do it in 3 days? Well, that's where the Ocarina comes into play. You can slow down time, you can go back in time, you can go forward in time, you can manipulate time, and you can also manipulate a bunch of different things. So it was kind of like this thing where inherently there was always a risk that you were going to fail, right? That the moon was going to come crashing into the earth. Sorry, I have to show that scene for people who haven't seen that scene. So this is what would start to happen as you would run out of time in Majora's Mask. And these are mechanics that I would love to see utilized more in MMOs as dynamic events. And Acheron's Call did a fantastic job of this. And I mentioned a number of Acheron's Call's dynamic events. But this is kind of proof of a concept that I like to mention a lot with people in regards to MMOs, which is that you can learn from every game. Every game that exists, MMOs can learn from, I think. And I think MMOs can learn from Zelda, in the case of making progression fun and a part of gameplay, right? So it's not like you're just getting things for whatever reason. You're getting things because they help you get better at the game, and they help you play the game differently. But also, let me see if I can find the other scene where it actually comes crashing in. Here we go. Here's the actual scene when you've basically lost the game. You see the time running out right here? And obviously, these mechanics would be kind of different if they did it in a MMO. But imagine if you had something of this scale in a MMO. Like, imagine how much that would change the world that you would live in that game, but also just your experiences with it. You have some big object like this, where maybe, for example, your team or your guild or the server was unable to stop this moon from crashing. And next thing you know, just like in Acheron's Call, you lose one of your major cities. I think dynamic events need to raise the stakes. I know Guild Wars 2 tried to do the living story and the whole, whatever else your choices really matter. But I'd like to see some bigger dynamic events where you do really have some big changes in the world. And I'm not just talking about you released Cataclysm as an expansion and it's all like perfectly tailored within this like theme park game, and so it's not really the same experience as like sharing it with a bunch of people and sharing the experience of actually like the continent being changed or attacked or whatever. I mean, these are the kind of things I would like to see more in MMOs, that's for sure. Hey, what's up, Leva? You're not that late. You're about 30 minutes. Well, technically from when I started it, less. So 20 to 15. Rift came a bit close, losing large. Yeah, and that's actually something, if you remember Limpos, I highlighted in the Rift video. I like that Rift had at least like some type of systems where you could be locked out of cities. I like that. I liked being locked out of a city essentially because my team failed to capture a specific zone. I think that's kind of how it should be, especially if we're warring factions, right? If we're gonna be stuck in this like antiquated and frankly speaking just archaic two faction system, can we at least make those factions like really hate each other so we can have some kind of conflict and make it fun and exciting? It's so boring when it's two factions most of the time because it's just like there's such a limit of the stuff that you can do compared to like a game like Eve, right? Like how many choices for PvP and subterfuge do you have in a game like that? You have way more options because it's not just two factions. Exams are finished and now I can finally make your podcast. That's good, man. Glad to have you here. Our problem is with time games is that if you get it wrong, the game is absolutely horrid. The game would end in Majora's Mask. So. If that's your opinion of horrid, then you're basically agreeing with most people at the time that were not very happy that they had that mechanic in the game. But I bring that up as something that could be handled, frankly speaking, with a lot more finesse if they did it in a MMO, because obviously it's not something that you would have to start a single player game all the way over again. And it makes a lot more sense too if you tied it into the lore of whatever game that you had. The last thing I'll get to on the current gaming news is going to be GOG. Apparently there's been some recent rumblings that GOG has officially partnered with Microsoft. And as the article states, which I thought was a really, brilliant way of describing it, GOG's quest to unite all game launchers just might work. Microsoft is already on board. So GOG Galaxy 2.0, I thought they were already announcing the 3.0, which was supposed to be completely cross-platform. Or was that 2.0? I forgot if that was 2.0 or 3.0 at this point. But GOG Galaxy has been working on a lot of actually, should we I was wondering if we should start from the beginning with GOG. Nah, maybe I'll make a video someday about the different platforms and we can have that discussion. But I'm not going to go into that right now. That being said, this has me really interested because, yes, it's another already existing addition to the realm of platform wars. Obviously, GOG has been in existence now for a couple of years, but they've always been a bit of a fringe player. They've never been considered quite serious competition. And I think if they can very much, use a cross-save, cross-platform mechanic and then also work with and alongside a big company and publisher like Microsoft, it's hard to see how GOG Galaxy, at this point, their 2.0 version, wouldn't be able to compete with basically all the other competitors, right? Steam, Origin, what's the other one I'm thinking of? Epic Platform, and there's like one more. Uplay. I always forget about Uplay. I think most people do. But I always forget about Uplay. This could make GOG Galaxy a serious competitor. So there's not a whole lot else to report other than that, but I think that that's interesting to watch. It's going to be interesting to watch unfold. And certainly it now makes it seem as if it's not just one way. It's not just Steam dominating a market like it has for a long time. I'm not going to sit here and say the other competitors are anywhere close to where they need to be. In my personal experience, out of all of the other platforms, GOG is the one that I personally prefer the most. But we'll see after all of these changes and also the integration with Microsoft, because who knows? Maybe they'll find a way to muck it up. I always have flashbacks to games as a service or Windows Live games. What do they used to call it? It was GW Games for Windows Live, GFWL, what they used to call that denomination, where it was like specific games that were engineered for Windows Live, which was like back during the Vista and XP days. Oh man, anything that has that acronym attached to it usually doesn't have it. And I mean, a good example is the one that I'm covering this week, which Gotham City Imposters. That one, yeah, it had games for Windows Live as a content ID system attached to it, as well as Steam. And Warner Brothers had their own proprietary engine or proprietary content ID matching. I don't know. Very, very confusing. You guys will have to see in that Death of a Game video. Let's go ahead and move on, though. It's right about that time that I'd like to start the MMO roundtable. So if anybody would like to join me in the podcast lobby, if you've got a mic, for example, that's probably the only requirement, right? Obviously following the rules and of that nature. But the question, which I've already posted in chat, is what do you think is a feature that is underutilized in MMOs that should be utilized? And which feature do you think is sort of overutilized or overused? Again, this is open to all. So if you have anything you'd like to add or discuss about this, essentially the way it works is you come in, I let everybody speak their piece, and then after we can have any possible disagreements, if we have any possible disagreements, or just kind of explore maybe things that we'd like to have more details about, or ask people questions about their certain perspectives, and that type of stuff. Can't have him hog all the time again. Oh no, Ulysses wasn't there the last round table, so he got to miss it. If anything, this is his first one. Hard isn't going to make it today, even though he normally will be in with us on roundtable. But he had some drama stuff go down at work, so I think he's going to take some rest. All right, I'm going to go ahead and join the podcast lobby. So once again, if anybody would like to join me to discuss this topic, feel free. It's open. Hey, what's up, guys?
Hello. Hey, how's it going?
Ulysses was here first, so would you like to start?
Sure. So the first part of this question, what do I see underutilized that I'd like to see more? There's a pretty decent long list. I could talk for a very long time about what I'd like to see more of, but if I had to pick one that hasn't been overly discussed yet, I would like to see, and I'm not sure if this is the right terminology yet, but I'd like to see more intrinsic rewards. And what I mean by that are reward progression rewards that change both who your character is and how you interact with the world. For example, I think Legion and World of Warcraft did a great job of giving you trinkets and items that changed entirely the way that you would play your character. And I'd like to see more rewards. And I know that it might be difficult, it might take, more resources, but I think even just a few more adds a lot to the game, and as far as sort of things that people want to pursue, even if they're not necessarily optimal, giving people more options to change the way they play the game through progression, I think adds a lot of replayability. And the thing that I would see used a lot less is phasing and different forms of phasing. I think it removes a lot of the sort of authenticity, maybe, of the experience of playing the game. I think that there needs to be a more definitive experience. Like, I know that the world that I'm traveling through, the things that I'm doing in it, can be experienced by everybody who is also in this location. I think it takes away from the game whenever you have several different versions of the same place, even on the same server.
Okay, and then what would you say about your overused?
Oh, that's it. The phasing.
Okay, so
The
phasing is your overused.
Yes, I
Okay,
think different forms of phasing technology, I think, is overused and often defeats the thing that they were trying to do in the first place, which
gotcha.
is relieve player congestion.
German 2, would you like to go next?
Sure. So, I kind of talked a little bit about it in the roundtable channel, but I'll just kind of like go quick with it. So, the underutilized feature for me is I feel like having a multi-class system or a system sort of like that in more games might help them in the long run. So, two examples that came to mind, and kind of a third one that someone else brought up. So, for me, for example, like with Final Fantasy 14, I like the fact that you can essentially play all classes on one character instead of having to make alts. And for me, anyways, like because you have like kind of a main, they call them job in that game, like a main job you want to level, and then you have your alts. Maybe you want to go on the side. It gives you kind of a different change of pace if you want to say go from a tank to a DPS, or like a DPS to a healer, or like range to melee or magic or anything like that. And I feel like in that respect it can add a lot to replayability, kind of in a sense. And especially now with the next expansion, they're actually having it to where you can do the main storyline over as like a new game plus type thing. And I think that's a very interesting way of doing that. Or the other way I was thinking of too is like Runes of Magic, where they had your main class and then you had kind of a subclass, or even Guild Wars One, where you can kind of mix and match two classes. And I feel like more games should not like, I don't think they have to do it, but just like consideration on having a system like that that can work. Or even like Arcade, where they have the combination of your skill sets. Like there's not really direct classes. Like that definitely I feel like adds a lot to a game, at least for me personally, because I'm kind of spoiled by these choices now too. And in terms of the overused feature, I feel like the use of having like a large scale PvP, because of the technology not really being there to make it stable. I feel like more games shouldn't even really try with that. And what I mean by that is like for me, like WoW has a pretty good kind of mainline where with the battlegrounds you never see anything too huge. But I always think of like older games I played, like one that comes to mind is one I played called Pandora Saga, and that was I think it was 30 versus 30 versus 30, and trying to actually get into that and like play the PvP now was just a nightmare because it was unstable, like the frame rates were bad, the engine they were using just wasn't optimized for it. So for me personally, I feel like more games should try to kind of back off from like a huge, battleground type of deal unless they know their engine or whatever they're using can actually handle it. That's just me personally.
Okay, there's a lot to dive into so far. With I'm trying to write these down, by the way, so I did write these down, so don't worry, I won't forget the points, so we can bring them up after, just so everybody remembers everyone's points. But Osai, would you like to go next? If you're talking, I don't think we hear you. You probably have to run the Discord and administrator. That's usually what would happen to me whenever nobody could hear me. I would have to close out and then run it with administrator. But I can go now during your turn, and then you can go after. So for me, obviously there's been some really good ones mentioned, and also some ones that I'd like to talk about. I would say that the most underutilized feature, in my opinion, in a MMO, it's probably I'm gonna split hairs a little bit, but I'm actually gonna take the opposite position as Germa 2, which is I believe that there should be more specialization classes. I think that they should be more unique. I don't think people should be able to switch them. In fact, I think it should be incredibly difficult to play multiple classes. I think unless you're a very talented player and one who has a lot of time, you should not have a lot of different characters. But that's just my personal opinion on that one, and I'm totally willing to talk about that one after. As for my reasoning for why, Spark Notes edition, it comes down to like whenever you have like an adventure party. Let's make it about D&D. Ulysses is in chat and he knows about D&D. In fact, he's going to be my DM soon enough. So you have your adventure party, and ultimately the one kind of thing that you all accept no matter what is that you're working together, right? When you guys say that in D&D, no matter what, you got your adventure party, you're kind of working together. That's sort of something that's just agreed upon. Now, because of that, you have to, in a way, organize with those people in order to see kind of what they're going to play, right? So say, for example, you have a group of friends, none of you organize anything, and you all show up to a DM, and you're like, hey, we all want to be rogues. I mean, maybe they'll say yes, but probably not, and they'll probably go like, are you sure about that? You sure you want all rogues? Like, you're not going to have, a wizard or some type of druid or a priest, like whatever the other class ends up being. But that decision should not be as easy as being like, you know what, I played a rogue, I'm just going to switch now in the middle of my campaign. I think it should be, well, you picked a rogue, buddy. You're a rogue. And then as for the feature that I think is overused, I mean, man, I think that's a damn good one that you said, Germa 2. The whole games having PvP, open world PvP without actually having open world PvP. So it's like almost like a kind of a cheap rendition. I think that's definitely one thing that I think is overused. And frankly speaking, I don't really even know if it's that like useful or people are even playing it that much in those instances. But if I had to pick my own, I would probably say that the feature that I think is most overutilized has to be traditional quest systems in my eyes. Like a traditional, I right-click an NPC, he gives me a quest, and then I go and kind of do the quest. I'd probably say that that's pretty overutilized because I don't even think it's that good. Like, I don't think checklist gameplay is the best kind of gameplay for MMOs. I'm not really convinced about that yet. Obviously, theme park games kind of prove that they obviously work and work at a grand scale, but I'm just saying, like, for me personally, I don't like them. That's mine. So I wrote everybody's down. Do you want me to kind of... does everyone remember what everyone's point is, or do you want me to say them again?
I think I understand where everybody's at.
Yeah, I get it too. You're good.
Okay, so I guess it's my show. I'll start off. I'll start off with Germa 2's point, and then if you'd like to jump in, Ulysses, after, feel free. So his particular points, let me pull them up. He talked about the job system, and now I'm going to give you time, of course, and as much time as you need to explain your perspective with the job system. But I think my issue with the job system is that while you might find it as a really good system in a game like Final Fantasy, and I think Final Fantasy's made it work in both Final Fantasy XI and Final Fantasy XIV, I, however, don't think other people have really made it work all that well. I mean, think of like another MMO that really handles like multi-classes well. And I mean, yes, ArcAge had multi-classes, but it's not like in the same level as like Rift, for example. Like I think Rift had a little bit more interactivity between the souls. And I mean, technically there was also an extra soul, the PvP soul as well. I think it's hard to do that and balance it properly. But my biggest problem is actually just look at Guild Wars 2. That's exactly what my biggest problem is with that game is they kind of got rid of the Holy Trinity. And so now you have this idea of like everybody can kind of be everything, and yet nobody's nothing in particular. And that's a bit of my problem with like open-ended job systems, is that if everyone can kind of move between them, then it almost feels as if like nobody who plays that particular job is really unique. So say for example, if you're playing an MMO and you have a white mage on your server, and he's like the best white mage on the server, and everybody remembers him as like the white mage. He's dressed like a white mage, he uses white magic, and so you're just expecting him to be that. But then all of a sudden, he changes his job to something completely different. I get it. From a gameplay perspective, you're just changing the way you play, which is pretty huge for some people, but let's say you're very experienced, it's not a big deal for you. For me, it's more the immersion of it. It's like, okay, my Joe Blow guy that I just created, who was supposed to be a rogue, now all of a sudden he can do white magic. And he can do it damn good. It's just a little bit jolting and like, you know what I'm saying? Like it's disconnecting for me in that respect, like with regards to immersion. But I do always prefer more options over less options. So if you're going to ask me, would you have a Final Fantasy system over, say, for example, classic WoW's class system? I might pick Final Fantasies because I think classic WoW's classes are pretty simplistic. And I also don't think there's a lot of variety amongst them as much as people might think. And I think Final Fantasy does a way better job at that.
Excuse me. I think that that kind of plays into my point earlier about intrinsic rewards in that. So a class and unlocking new classes would be a great example of an intrinsic reward. Obviously, Nerd has a point in that if it doesn't feel like it's been earned, if there's not a good explanation of why my character suddenly has this new power, then that can backfire and feel bad for the people that do, and I think a lot of people do, want a good explanation for why their character changes and why their character progresses. But to and because Limposs was saying earlier that he didn't really understand what I was saying about intrinsic rewards, I think that that's a good example of one. Is a new class being able to unlock and play an entirely different class would be an example of an intrinsic reward for progressing my character.
Did you have anything you wanted to add to maybe your perspective on it, German 2? Because you've played a lot of different MMO.
So, at least for like Final Fantasy's sake, I would say for me, part of the reason why it works so well is because in the game's lore, it actually makes sense because your character is like it's kind of annoying. It's like you're blessed, so not really chosen one, but you have kind of like a gift, and it's like because of this, you have this ability to. Uh, they don't necessarily really say it, but you can switch between jobs, and I think part of that comes with the fact that, like Ulysses said, you unlock things for that class. So let's say, I don't know, for example, this last expansion, Stormblood, you can unlock a samurai. So you do a quest line, you unlock the samurai, and it's like, cool, now I have this class. Well, then the other thing with Final Fantasy I like is there's like class quests specifically. So there's like a whole storyline that you can go with for a certain class. So like I want to say, depending on what class you're picking, every about 3 to 5 levels, you'll get like a new part of that storyline, and it like continues with each new expansion. So if you go back to say the classes from the base game, which is A Realm Reborn, going by like the base classes, they're actually not the class you'd see at endgame. So example, like I played a Marauder when I first started, and down the line that class becomes a warrior. And so the way that works is that even at endgame you technically can play Marauder, but you get this thing called a soul crystal, and that gives you like the ability to essentially play a new class or play like at least in that respect, like the upgraded version of that class. And so they kind of use a job crystal or a soul crystal for like every newer class. And I feel like if you can make it work in the lore, that's a big one for sure. Like obviously, Guild Wars 2, I've heard because I've only dabbled in it. I mean, I won't go in detail with that, but it's like if it removes like roles, then yeah, I can definitely see where that'd be an issue. Because I remember even when that was like first being announced and shown off, they made a big push on, oh, we don't have Holy Trinity. There's no tanks. There's no healers. None of that. You play your class and you can like save your friends and this that. And I can agree. Yeah, it sucks because then that kind of removes a use in a sense like a usefulness. And also to kind of touch on Rift a bit, that was another one that someone else brought up, and it's true. Like Rift system was definitely unique, and it was different. But the thing is with Rift is that it was like a class and a subclass. Like, you would pick like say like a warrior, and then you had like all these subclasses to go with it, like you said, including the PvP one. That one was fine too, but at the same time, that kind of for me kind of goes with Guild Wars 2 problem, where it's like, okay, once they got far enough in with the game, especially at the free to play, any class can do anything. It just comes down to what subclasses you have unlocked that you go in the cash shop with. So by the time like around the time I like fully quit, 'cause I was like, this is too much. They literally made it to where, okay, you're a warrior, you can heal. You're a rogue, you can tank. Like it got stupid, and it's like, okay, that's a bit much. Whereas when you have a staple class, then at least you know what can you expect from it. So I can see where you're coming from, where you don't think more games should do the multi-class system, and I can agree with that. But for me, I feel like if you can make it work in your game and not have it be just mindless and you're not thinking, then sure, yeah, probably better you don't have that. At least that's just me personally.
Yeah, I guess if I had to specify, I'm okay with it as long as there's consequences. And like that's the biggest thing for me is in any system, the number one thing I think about is okay, like what's the benefit and then what's the consequence for doing this. So I think that's kind of why I didn't like that they removed the Holy Trinity. Was actually like, okay, so you removed the Holy Trinity, which now essentially makes it to where whenever somebody is very survivable in a game like that doesn't have a Holy Trinity, despite what you might think, oh, when someone's really survivable, they don't have a healer anymore, so they're going to be easier to kill. But then it's kind of like, well, not necessarily, because now that they balance the game differently, maybe it's not balanced on heals anymore. Maybe it's now balanced on things like shields. And by the way, it is. Guild Wars 2 is balanced on things like that. So it's like, it's more than just like you said, like I'm completely against removing aspects of gameplay if you're going to add in subclasses, but I really enjoy Neverwinter Nights system, one of my favorite games. But I just love the idea, just like in typical D&D, let me specialize, but if I specialize, I should get penalties for it. Like I should not be allowed to be a level 100 rogue, level 100 mage, and a level 100 warrior. For me personally, I find that a little bit too kind of disconnecting. Like I don't know, I think of myself in real life. Am I the strongest, the fastest, and the smartest? Like, no, I'm not. And so, yes, I know in a video game it's a fantasy, but I like my fantasies to be at least somewhat believable. So I don't want my character to be some all god powerful character. But I can't help but also point out that maybe in the case of like games like Final Fantasy, the biggest problem is like they don't have a different kind of content for people who are replaying content. And what I mean by that is like, say for example, if you're like, hey, I want to level up this job that I haven't leveled up at all. I mean, you have to start at a low point, right? In order to start leveling it up. I don't know exactly how the system works, but where would you say you start whenever you pick up a new job? Do you start automatically level 1? Is it level 10, like
Depending on which job you pick, the base jobs start at level 1. I think the Heaven's Word start at 30. The Stormblood jobs are at 50, and then the new Shadowbringer jobs are at 60. So you do get kind of like a basis point. And again, all this explained in the lore when you're doing like the job quest on why like maybe your character is a little stronger than they would be if say they went with just job instead. So there is a starting point, but at the same time, like I'll definitely agree that when you say you go from like for me, I first job I got to 60 recently was a paladin, and so I'm like, okay, I got a paladin 60, but I want to switch it up, play DPS. Well, I'm gonna go with, say, like rogue, and it's like, okay, start level 1. All right, well, what does it do? You have challenge logs, kind of boring, but it works. You have fates, kind of boring, but it works. Then you have like the dungeon queues, which is just, hey, let me just AFK in town, go in the queue, and just wait like 20 minutes for my queue to pop up. Like, yeah, I can agree it's not the best system, but for me it works. I can see why a lot of people wouldn't like that. So that's just how I see it, anyways.
Yeah.
Um,
Sorry, I
I
was just gonna finish off with what Leva said in chat. She said instead of making subclasses multi-classes, I'd much rather see them making each class extremely deep with a lot of paths to take within that class. And I think that kind of, we could find maybe some middle ground between our points. Is maybe we have a class system, sort of like we've been discussing, but maybe within that class system you have a variety of choice. And I'm talking more than just 3 talent trees. You've
definitely.
got more choice.
Definitely, and I think if you were to do a system, because I don't think I understood well until you explained it better, the how the job system worked. I agree with NS in that you should, whenever you come to a new intrinsic way of playing the game, whenever you've changed your character significantly and that they interact with the world differently, there should be consequences. To put it in terms maybe that a lot of people would understand from a World of Warcraft perspective, if you're from that background. If I play my paladin to level 50 and I decide I'm going to become a death knight, then I shouldn't be able to return to the Church of the Light. It's kind of like whenever you become an Oathbreaker paladin in D&D, you're no longer welcome by the members of that faith anymore because you've broken your oath. Now you've changed the way you play, and that's interesting. That's great, but it feels earned, and there's consequences, like you're saying.
Well, yeah. So to bring up a good example of this was actually Tabula Rasa. And Tabula Rasa, the way that the class system works, which many games have copied this since then, but it worked where, like, let's say for example you hit level 10, now you have a branch. Okay, I can either go this way or go this way. Either way changes the way the game or your class plays, and might have like slight things that make it particularly unique to the other one. So then you get to level 20 and you have another tree. You can choose left or right. And then, they had like a system like that. So where it was like, you're still progressing and you're still changing aspects of your gameplay archetype, if you want to put it that way. But you're not losing your identity. You're not just becoming a warrior if you were a rogue or becoming something else. It's more of like maybe I'm a warrior, but maybe I prefer dexterity-based or finesse-based weapons over, say, for example, strength-based weapons. So maybe I choose the, duelist warrior tree or specialization instead of the, I don't know, the brute or the tank or whatever it ends up being. And I think that the reason why we're seeing less and less of things like that is just simply because it's easier to release a single class that's not fleshed out and then just be like, oh, that's good enough. And that's actually something that I didn't even bring up, which I feel like is a good counterpoint that Germer2 could bring up, which is that, hey, many games do classic class systems, and many of them suck. So maybe doing something different is better in a certain respect.
So basically what you're saying is you'd rather see an evolution of the character rather than I put my points in a certain talent tree, so now I'm a different thing.
Yeah, personally speaking, I would like if they could tie it in, sort of like what you were saying about intrinsic rewards, really, if I want to tie that together. It's like, here's a perfect example of, and by the way, one of my favorite examples to bring up, and maybe people have heard it before, but so in Galaxies, you had professions, and professions were what you chose. It wasn't what you picked whenever you spawned. That became something that was added later on with the new gaming experience, or the NGE that came in like 07 or whatever. In the original Galaxies, you just chose a profession. And so say, for example, you chose to be a smuggler. Choosing a smuggler wasn't just what abilities you got, what stats you got. It was also the way that you played the game. So say, for example, one of your quest lines to make money, your job, if you will, to use the terminology from Final Fantasy, but it's used a little bit different in Galaxies, because Galaxies, when they say job, they mean literally you make money from it. So say, for example, a smuggler, they make money by smuggling spice. And so in that game, you might ask, okay, so how, you just take spice to the next zone? Well, no, they came up with some cool ways to do it. Say, for example, whenever you spawn on Mos Eisley or you go to Mos Eisley, you might get stopped and approached by some stormtroopers. They might, if you have contraband on you, they will search you and they will actually attack you. That's an aspect that's in the game. So it creates content without actually even having to really do anything, right? Because the NPCs are programmed to look for smugglers. So if they find you, they're going to say, hey, let me see your ID. And anyone who's played the game can remember this. And then all of a sudden, your class turns into your job and your profession. It means a lot more than just what abilities you have. And the bounty hunter is a way better example because the bounty hunter system in Galaxies was far more fleshed out. But I played a bounty hunter, and the way it worked was like they essentially taught you how to be a bounty hunter. It wasn't just like, I'm level 60, woohoo, I'm now the #1 bounty hunter. No, it was like they taught you the entire way. Okay, so now you need to do this kind of thing. Use your droid to track down where your target's going to be. Then maybe go, find your target. You need a speeder to be able to catch him or something like that. Maybe you use traps in order to weaken him. Like, it's kind of like mixing a job and a profession or a class together, I think ultimately is how you make things like kind of intrinsic.
This is probably going to be an unpopular opinion, but speaking of Star Wars Galaxies and sort of around this topic, while I don't think that they implemented it correctly, I don't have a problem with them making Jedi easier to be in Star Wars Galaxies. What I think that they should have done instead is that you should have still started as the other professions, right? But you should have had to go out into the world, maybe find a hidden Jedi temple, and go through a decent process to become a Jedi. I think that makes it more fulfilling and more enjoyable, and sort of lessens the sting for players that did have to put in a lot of work to become a Jedi. But I didn't have a problem necessarily with making it easier, maybe not as easy as they made it, if that makes sense.
I mean, you're not going to get disagreement from me, despite common belief or that recent video that blew up on YouTube. I don't believe Jedi were the reason that Galaxies failed. I know that that's like been a thing that's been kicked around a lot. I think there's far more egregious issues that have been cited by the original developer himself that I think are way worse than the Jedi problem. The Jedi problem, though, is an interesting one because it's essentially the idea of a prestige class, right? And prestige classes don't really get explored in MMOs that much anymore. But they used to be a thing in old school RPGs all the time. In fact, Dragon Disciple is the first one I think of in Neverwinter Nights. I love playing the Dragon Disciple because I could turn into a dragon. I don't know, I thought it was cool. But it takes a long time to become a Dragon Disciple. I don't even remember what spec I had, but it took forever in order for me to have the proper traits and skills in order to actually, have that prestige class as something that I could choose. So maybe more prestige classes are another possibility, and I'm in agreement in the sense that I don't think that Jedi were the main problem in Galaxies being shut down or whatever else. It's a big problem, but it wasn't the biggest problem.
I think that there's something to be said for, like you're saying, that there needs to be an evolution and an explanation and an earning of the changes that you make to your character. There's an example of this in the current D&D group that I'm running. One of my players was playing a sorcerer, but wanted to start putting levels into Warlock. He wanted to be a great old one Warlock. So think like Cthulhu monsters, Lovecraft. And so what I did for him is that he found a book, think Necronomicon. This is a very strange sort of magic tome that's locked. And so as he levels up, he gets strange visions and acquires new powers, and it feels more earned for him doing it that way rather than just say, up, you level up, before the next session, put your points in the right place, pick up the spells, and I expect you to just be doing it the next time we play.
It's also kind of like, how in some games, like I think WoW is a kind of big example of this. At least in WoW, you have professions where they can kind of coincide with certain classes, right? Wouldn't you guys say that? Like some professions in WoW kind of coincide with certain classes, but it's not maybe as integral as I'd like it to be. And what I mean by that is that in many games, people will ask, like, how do you make money? And in many MMOs, it's hard to make money from traditional aspects. And when I mean traditional aspects, I mean either playing the market, right? Or just I would say playing the market is not really as common as you might think it is in MMOs. But specifically with to go back to what we were talking about earlier. Sorry, I'm also reading chat at the same time, so sometimes people say some good things, and I'm oh yeah, good point. NGE did become good later on. For those who never got the experience of new gaming experience, yeah, it sucked at first, but it did get kind of better later on. Anyway, I digress. That's like a personal pet peeve of mine is when you look at a game, to go back to what I was talking about with the market systems, if you have a player that doesn't have an easily accessible or readily available way to make some sort of money, obviously people get frustrated. And most of the time what people end up doing is just grinding, right? Grinding ends up being kind of like the thing that you do in order to make money. But what if we could find a way to make classes actually be professions and jobs, and those could make you money by doing them, by doing the roles that are required with that particular class. Like say, for example, you're an adventurer, but you choose to be a wizard. You might reach a certain village that has like a certain propensity for magic, and they can teach you a lot more than maybe some other area or zone can. And so at that village or whatever else, they also have the ability for you to do inscriptions, and maybe inscriptions allows you to make money. And so it's just like little things like that for each class. You have to think about ways of tying it more into the environment. And I get, for some people, they might ask why, ultimately why? And the simplest answer is it's just that's how the real world works, right? Like, I mean, that's just how it works. Like, everybody's job is kind of related to what they're like at least somewhat good at, generally speaking. So it's kind of like whatever you have more of a propensity in, or more of a skill in, is probably going to be the thing that you use to make the most money. So it just seems like a no-brainer to me. And at this point, I don't have anything more to say about it other than, developers, can we get out of this like ancient mentality of releasing like 4 classes and then being like, oh, but there's 2 trees in each of them. There's so much to play. And it's just like, most of us played MMOs from the beginning, right? Most of us here on my channel and who follow my content at least played some old kind of game. We're kind of bored of just 4 classes or 5 classes or 6 classes with essentially no customization and no tie-in to the actual virtual world in which you're playing in.
I do have a little bit to say on that. I think that a lot of developers, as time has gone on, they're less and less ready to be complex in the systems that they create for their games for a couple of reasons. Because it's labor intensive, it's expensive, on their labor cost. It's also might put off new players, it might put off people. But I actually think that if that's your mentality, I think that the place to do that, to add complexity that won't hurt both your cost and new players, is to put it in your crafting. I think that it's very easy to set up a complex crafting system that all it really is you're adding new items to farm, and you're creating a bar that basically an interface that creates these items. And the more complex you make your crafting, the more niches there are to do, the more variety of activities there are for your players to do to make money. It becomes more obvious what you can do to make more money. And there's also the opportunity to change over time what you're doing to make that money. I think that it shouldn't be hard for a new player to find a niche in these complex systems either. I'll give you an example. Star Wars Galaxies. I was a child when I was playing that game. And even as a child, I understood that there was a complex economy, and I needed to find something I could do to make money. What did I do to make money that was very simple? I was a solar farmer. I set up solar wind farms and made energy that I then sold. That was very simple. I made money. As a very new player, it wasn't hard to get into, and it probably wasn't that expensive for them to implement that complex system. At least over time, it paid off.
It comes down to like, how much work are they willing to put into their initial idea of what their world means to them. And I think that's kind of where I get a lot more offended than most people. Like, you guys hear me bring up Guild Wars 2 a lot. Do you want to really know why I bring up Guild Wars 2 a lot sometimes when I talk about problems or something like that? It's not because I think it's the worst game. In fact, I think it's one of the more the best way to describe Guild Wars 2 for me is it's the most unoffensive game. And I think that's offensive to me. It's so unoffensive. It doesn't really do anything that's offensive. I mean, what does it do that's offensive? What mechanic in Guild Wars 2 is controversial? I guess customization being the main form of progression, but people are okay with that who play the game. I bring up Guild Wars 2 a lot because it's initial expectations. That's what I always try and tell people is like, if you just set the expectations from the very beginning, then you know what you're getting into. The problem with MMOs is that the language is so morphed and like all over the place where a lot of the time people just get marketed into playing games. And I think that I know it's an interesting perspective here, and maybe you could add to this as well, Ulysses. It's hard from the perspective of someone who's working in a business. You're trying to make money. Of course, you're not going to like market your game worse than it is, right? You're more likely to market it better than it is because that just makes logical sense, right? But at the same time, I feel like tempering people's expectations is probably one of the most important aspects you should do. And I think that's, frankly speaking, a big reason why Anthem had so much problems. Is that if you don't temper people's expectations, then of course they're going to expect the world. And that was what happened to Guild Wars 2 and what happened to SWTOR. Both games were massively hype. Possibly the two most hype MMOs I've ever seen in my life. I've never seen two more hype games. Did they come out anything close to what they were hyped as? Factually speaking, no, they did not. Okay, and I think that's my biggest problem. To bring this back to what we were discussing, with Galaxies, if you go into that with this idea of, hey, we want to create Star Wars, the virtual world, well, of course you have to build crafting systems. How else could you do it? How else could you have a real world that's supposed to emulate the Star Wars universe if there's no way to create a speeder? If there's no way to sell a speeder to somebody and make money off of it? If you're trying to have a real, believable Star Wars world, the economy, essentially, and I'm a big Expanded Universe fan, I've read probably 50 books, it has to be about the economy. It has to be about crafting. That's, in my opinion, the single coolest thing about Galaxies and Star Wars in general is just possibilities of what could happen, right? The possibilities of what could happen. But really, I'm going to end this with my general idea of, if developers are just kind of more upfront with what kind of game we're getting into, then maybe we wouldn't be in such a situation where we would be constantly let down. The problem is that a developer is always going to essentially argue that their game is an MMO, right? If that's what they're trying to do. Say, for example, Black Desert Online, I sat down with the lead head at Cacao Games or whatever else at Pearl Abyss, and I'm like, hey, tell me about how this game is a virtual world. And I'm sure he would make an argument that it was. Do I think it is? Not even close. But they would market that, right? It's a living, breathing world. Games like Arcade market that all the time. It's a living, breathing world. But is it really? Is it really?
It's kind of like how on YouTube people used to put as many search terms as possible, no matter how unrelated they were to their video. I don't know to what degree that still happens. I think Google's gotten a little bit smarter on that front, a little bit. But I think that you're right. I think that they need to do a better job of managing their expectations. I think some of the older developers in the industry are starting to talk about that. But there's still this attitude in the marketing of games. I think that it's as many customers as possible, with the broadest terms possible. And I think that will backfire.
I think so too, and I think it already has. In fact, I really want to highlight that point that if you continue to sell your game with essentially false expectations, it's not going to end well. Like, when does it end well? It doesn't really end well. I mean, I'm not going to sit here and say that like certain games are just complete outright failures, but if we want to talk about commercially, right at the moment, Guild Wars 2 is in trouble. Like, commercially, they are very much in trouble. I'm not going to say that that's because of the game or the design aspects of it. It's probably more the business, right? Because of its business model not being as easily exploitable as maybe, other NCSoft games. But I think that, again, and I like to always bring it back to this, but I always bring it back to that quote that Chris Avalon told me, where he said that oftentimes the biggest issues that happen are because people are only thinking about short-term profits and they're not thinking about long-term profits. Because why would you sell your game, why would you misrepresent your game and essentially like sell it, or I mean, you're kind of like, I don't want to say you're lying, because it's not lying, right? It's not blatant. It's more of like misleading. If you're misleading people whenever you advertise your game, that's only going to hurt you, I feel like. It really is only going to hurt you. And I think that MMOs realize that the hard way. They would come in and be like, hey, we're going to be the next greatest thing ever. And then people play the game and they're like, this is just like everything else I've played already. And in some cases, you might even be okay with that. But for me personally, I'm just like, hey, can you just tell me it's not going to be another, I don't know, crazy, inventive, amazing experience, and just be like, it's going to be a fun MMO. We're going to have classes. We're going to have this, that, and this. And it's going to be, that's just what it's going to be. Here's actually what's in our game. Here are our feature list. That's what they used to do. Here's a trailer showing off some of our features. But it's just, this goes back to what we talk about with terminology, but also just expectations. I think if expectations are better managed from the perspective of the consumer, us, we have to manage our expectations better for sure, but also managed better by developers, we wouldn't have so many issues in the MMO realm. I don't really think we would.
Well, it would be different if we were still selling games like, Fable 1, where you're going to be able to watch, trees grow, and you're going to be able to do etc., extravagant. And all the cost of the project is tied up in the box, and all you've got to do is move boxes. But if you're selling a games as a service or a games as a platform or a pay to win game, then you've got to retain people. And if you're going to retain people, they've got to know what they're getting into at least a little bit.
Yep. And I think that's a good place to stop on. I think obviously there's a lot of different overutilized, underutilized. It's mostly opinion based, right? And I think that all of us here have presented some very realistic and in my opinion, despite me slightly disagreeing with German2's point about jobs, ultimately I agree with his conclusion, which is just more variety, right? So I think really I can't disagree with anyone's points here in particular. And that's why I made it a big point to finish off by ranting about expectations. Because really, if expectations are just tempered from the very beginning on both sides, we won't have as many instances whenever you play a game and you essentially have to realize that it's not for you after playing it, whereas you could kind of maybe figure that out possibly beforehand. But at the same time, somebody brought up something in chat that I wanted to highlight as well. They said that, hey, remember, classes are so it's more convenient and easier for developers, not really the players. And that's probably true. So, I mean, maybe that answers a bit of our initial idea of maybe why they don't do more inventive systems. The other thing is kind of to go back to expectations quickly before I end this MMO roundtable, which, by the way, thank you, German2, Ulysses, and unfortunately, I don't think Osayef could figure out his mic situation, but thanks also for joining us. But I wanted to end it with just the idea that if we become more and more used to like an MMO launching, let's say, for example, just 4 classes, if we become more and more used to that and we don't criticize that, essentially that's going to be the norm. We're no longer going to get multi-varied, combat trees. It's going to become more simple and more simple. And WoW was a perfect example of that. I'm not going to say the original talent trees are super complicated. I don't think they are. That being said, are they more complicated, or is there more choice than, say, for example, in the traditional system that exists in WoW now, where it's like, how many rows is it of skills that you get to choose from? It's like 8 or 9 or something. I'm not exactly sure how many it is, but it's not a lot, right? Compared to what it used to be. And now it's like you pick like the certain abilities from that particular talent tree or the particular abilities that you want on your character instead of really having a talent tree in the first place. I think that with games like WoW kind of making that more commonplace, we need to get back to yelling above the rooftops that, hey, give us more class choice, give us more variety, or at least find a way to make us, like Ulysses said, just care about our character in a more intrinsic way. Something that means more than just, I'm wearing this outfit, so therefore I'm a rogue, but something that tells me, I pick Locks, I do things that rogues do. That's just what I want to feel in one of these games, but that's just my rant about it all. Thank you guys for joining, by the way, and I'm not going to hold you guys here any longer than we need to. We probably should get to the MMOs on the Go segment. So thanks, Germ2 and Ulysses, for stopping by and adding your 2 cents. I appreciate it.
Sure. Bye.
See you later. All right. We were kind of all over the place near the end there, mainly because of me. Sometimes, as I told you guys, what happens for me is like I'll work through things and then I start to realize that I haven't thought about something. And then it kind of makes me go through it live. And for many people, maybe that's entertaining. I'm not as much used to doing that because obviously the majority of my content is produced. So it's kind of like recorded and done. But that's ultimately why I wanted to do a podcast, is so you guys could see live essentially how my thought process works, which is like, you know, I don't have all of this stuff written down. You know, I'm not an oracle. It's just I've had a lot of experiences and I'm trying to make sense of it all. And frankly speaking, I think developers getting away with less variety in classes and you know, less expectations of what, you know, should. I mean, let's just point out gender locks, right? Like, does anybody here think that a gender lock class is anything other than just saving money? Like, I'm curious. Like, does anyone here have a good argument for gender lock classes or things of that nature? I haven't heard a good argument that says it's anything other than they're just trying to save resources. I like gender lock classes because they enforce gender stereotypes. Wait, you're telling me that my breast showing as a female character isn't armor? Is that what you're telling me? We don't even have a gender lock in real life these days. Yeah, gear in real life does not have a gender lock. I don't think it ever really has had a gender lock. I mean, dudes were wearing skirts way back when as well. Right? It just saves money, but in Korea it gets around gender laws when the game uses Korean social security numbers. That would make sense. If it fits the lore, say a race of insects, and they were a class that's like a breeder of sorts, then it makes sense that the class is only female. Like the queen bee is female. Oh, I'm in total agreement, Leva. And by the way, I should kind of recant what I said earlier. I actually have seen it work in a game before. It was Warhammer Online and the Witch Elf. For most people who are aware of Warhammer lore or Witch Elves or Dark Elves, obviously you're not going to see a dude scantily clad with daggers being a Witch Elf. Like it doesn't fit the lore. So it made sense for Witch Elves to only be female characters. No one really complained about the Witch Elf. Looking back in hindsight, none of us really complained. But would we have complained if, say, for example, a warrior priest could only have been male? Or maybe we would have complained if a bright wizard only could have been female? I think we would have complained. Absolutely. It just seems like more and more over the years, though, it's almost like people were stopping the fight against that stuff because they kind of see it as like, is it really that important? I kind of think it is. I think all healer females should be gender locked to female, and all tank classes should be gender locked to male. It is the way it should be. I think it's fine if there's enough classes. Well, now you're starting to understand the interesting aspects of it, right? Is it really just for variety and for lore reasons, or is it because we don't want to make more classes? Probably we don't want to make more classes and more animations. And maybe that's why Asian MMOs have never particularly like resonated with me, is that I like a lot of variety and choice and a lot of variety in playstyle. I don't like when my 4 classes are warrior, priest, ranger, wizard. It's not, it's kind of like, I need to do all the work for coming up with my own character, for my own lore. Like, am I playing another game at this point, or am I just kind of playing an action game? Right? Is there any consequences to what I'm doing? Is there any like background story? Why am I a rogue versus why am I a wizard? You know, what kind of wizard am I? Are all wizards the same? Are all, you know, warriors the same? Are all priests or healers the same? Not really. And at least they shouldn't be. But I digress. More picking on Asian titles and their lack of class choice. There's always a cute race like gnomes, but there's always that one race or class that makes no sense. You mean like the ones where they give them these giant guns, but they have like melee abilities? Terra has that. A blaster? Is that what they call it? They have some like gun wielding class who has like melee abilities with his gun. That one always was like very confusing to me because I'm kind of like, wouldn't I want like a really far shooting gun or something? I could just shoot really far away? I don't know. Gun blades are a thing, so maybe logic isn't always the thing that people were thinking about when it comes to gameplay. Let's go ahead and move to a semi-related topic. We've been talking about Final Fantasy and job systems. Final Fantasy XIV has reached 1 million active non-trial players according to Lodestone database census. I've done research on Lodestone, the database census in particular. It's pretty legit. They have a couple measures to make sure they're not just taking into consideration players who are just creating accounts, right? So that's why it says active non-trial players. Remember how I always complain when people talk about player numbers? Well, I'm not going to complain about this particular user, Rocket Chat B. He made it a point to point out that these are active non-trial players. So these are actually active players. And if you guys remember my Life of a Game video on Final Fantasy XIV, it actually had reached right about 1 million and then kind of dropped back down drastically after, I believe it was, or no, rather it was before Heavensward. So I think now this is probably the most successful that Final Fantasy XIV has done in, I mean, ever, right? This is probably the best it's done ever. And I think that that's interesting, obviously, for a number of reasons. Right now, it doesn't have a lot of competition in that respect, especially in the things that it focuses on particularly, like raids and dungeon content. That was kind of like WoW's old thing, and since WoW BFA isn't doing so well right now, modern WoW, if you will, isn't doing so well, people are kind of speculating maybe that's why Final Fantasy XIV is kind of on the rise. I think it's more than that, though. You can never chalk up a particular game or company's like success to its competitors doing worse. It's just, it doesn't really work that way because it's like they also, if they're doing worse, that means that Final Fantasy XIV is also doing better, right? Because when one game is doing worse and they're losing players and the other one's gaining more players, it means they're doing better. It's not just because of their competition. It's also because they're offering something clearly that either isn't represented or isn't being properly represented. Final Fantasy XIV is not really my style of game. I'm not a big PvE player myself when there's no consequence essentially to it. And when there's no PvP out in the open world, that's not my particular favorite type of game. But I have to give Final Fantasy XIV all the credit in the world because Final Fantasy XIV started as a game that was essentially on its deathbed already, out the door, right? I mean, I made a Life of a Game video on it because essentially it was resurrected from the brink of destruction. So yes, sometimes I can be a little bit down on the current generation of MMOs, but let's just take, you know, a little bit of time here to give Final Fantasy XIV a round of applause because I do think it is commendable that they were able to make such a grand comeback. And frankly speaking, that's unheard of in the realm of MMOs. It's completely unheard of. So props to Final Fantasy XIV and its recent population numbers. We'll see how those change after WoW Classic, right? To see if its competition really has anything to do with it as much as we might think. Speaking of World of Warcraft, though, a recent World of Warcraft player survey apparently confirms an incoming level squish. Now, maybe some of my WoW aficionados in chat can tell me if this has been confirmed any more so than we've seen so far. Apparently, this is what people saw. Are you aware that the maximum level of 120 will be reduced in the future? A level squish. The level squish will reduce the total number of levels required to access the most current game content. The new level cap will be dramatically lower than the current level cap of 120. 120 levels is the current level cap as of Battle for Azeroth, modern WoW, if you want to call it that. Huh. I guess, is anybody surprised that they were going to have to do a level squish? Or are more people, say, maybe myself, putting on their fedoras and thinking, what does this mean? I think that there might be a bit of a fun conspiracy theory here. You could argue that maybe a level squish is pretty much the only natural way to do a sequel. What do you guys think? I mean, I think if they're going to do a level squish and divide it in terms of content, say, for example, this expansion is level 1 to 10. This expansion is level 20 to 30. This one is 50 to 60. Battle for Azeroth is the max level content, but maybe Legion is levels, I don't know, 50 to 60. Whatever they end up coming up with, right? If we get a little bit conspiracy theory here, maybe this is a natural move before you would consider doing a sequel, right? Because people have kind of speculated, what if they did, you know, a Squish, you were back to level 60, but then after level 60, they just released a new game or a new expansion that was supposed to kind of like change the trajectory of the game. It's possible if they did a level Squish, they could bring it back closer aligned with what their original goals and values were with World of Warcraft. At this point, though, as I've said before, and I don't know if anybody else in chat agrees with me, feel free to disagree. I think that WoW, as it stands, is kind of it's overexerted itself. It's overexposed, and what I mean by that from a design perspective is like they've gotten so far away of what originally made them successful and what originally made online world successful, because it's objective to some level, right? There's something that all of these games have to have in common that works. We don't know exactly what these things are, but we can speculate. Say, for example, consistent updates, right? That's a big one. Good expectations, maybe not having a very rocky launch. These are like objective measures of maybe if you don't have one of these instances occur, that you have a better chance of your game doing better. The survey also asked questions about level boosts, and without completely changing the leveling system, without changing the numbers. It won't fix much just to do a Squish. That's a really good point. That's a good point, Rippies. It's not as simple as them just doing a level Squish, as I was kind of like alluding to. They'd have to not only do a level Squish, they'd have to do a content Squish, if that makes sense. A content Squish, as in they would have to figure out, okay, if 60 is our max level, how are we going to get all of this content in level 60? In 60 levels? Well, they're going to have to change the way that you level up, rate at which you level up, the speed, the difficulty, possibly, right? It's a lot of balancing that goes into doing a level Squish that's more than just subtracting 60 levels from the game, right? What I think is interesting about this in particular is this is essentially the opposite of what they had been doing all of these years, right? They kept increasing the level cap while increasing the scope, while not necessarily continuing the scope. And what I mean by continuing the scope is, currently as it stands right now, if I play Modern WoW, I can get a level boosted character and immediately start playing the newest expansion. I can kind of ignore all of the previous expansions if I want to, right? The content, I don't really have to play them if I don't want to. I think that that's completely ass backwards. I do not think that that should be how these games work at all. Do I understand why they work that way? Yeah, because it's all about getting the next player base into your next coolest fancy expansion as fast as possible to make more money. However, from an actual like player perspective, and let's just say like an ecosystem perspective, does it make a whole lot of sense to every couple of years release content that essentially completely trivializes the rest of your content, and then just being like, oh yeah, all that in-game content that you guys have been focusing on getting to all of these years doesn't matter anymore. New raids, new content, new gear. Yay, new expansion, right? It's not as exciting like when you look at it from that perspective. And so I'm wondering if this is their like a move at kind of going backwards, if that makes sense. They're like, we kept making our old content useless. Maybe we should make it useful, right? I see a level Squish similar to how comics reset their numbers. Probably won't mean much. Plays an RPG, jumps into the final boss. Great. That's that's a representation, or that's a good representation of the game. Yeah, exactly. It's like it is absurd when you make certain comparisons that MMOs do, like design choice wise, compared to like single player games. It's always like, why do we even let? I get it though, because there wasn't like, here are how MMOs are supposed to be made. We've kind of been just for like 20 years, right? I think now, after it's been 20 years since like some of the biggest MMOs have come out, maybe we're finally reaching a point to where we can actually like maybe get a little bit more meticulous. And what I mean is like we can actually look at a game design or a virtual world and start to wonder, how can we solve problems that we had in the past? And that's actually something that I'll talk about. I'll rant a little bit about right now. I'm gonna for a second, take a step away from the MMOs on the Go segment, and instead get a little soapboxy. I know. Oh no, there it goes. Everybody loves to make me rant. It's like the easiest way to make this thing last longer. But the rant that I wanted to go over this week was actually concerning the term pay to win. You guys have heard me talk about this before, I'm sure. But there was a particular very interesting thread that I kind of, randomly found on the internet. That's kind of interesting in hindsight, but it's also interesting to examine the term pay to win and what it means in current, 2019. Now, the reason why I bring this up is this is a good example of how over time terminology changes and also the market of MMOs have changed. And so that means that no longer can we have the same viewpoint of how things used to be because obviously things are continually changing. I've always wondered myself, what does pay to win mean, or what's the most common found definition of this? And ironically enough, this random guy on the Allodes forum came up with kind of, as far as I could tell, the most educated answer of this question. So he says, this post is supposed to be informative and helpful for those who don't know what the term pay to win means. It's not supposed to be negative, and it's not supposed to tell you if Allodes is pay to win or not. Please note that the term pay to win is subjective and may have slightly different meanings to different people. But when known critics talk about pay to win in reviews, gaming magazines, and etc., it's usually similar to the definitions mentioned in this post, since it's quite general. It's a quite general meaning of the term. What he's trying to establish is that, yes, there's no specific definition of a term. However, there is a largely accepted definition of a term that's maybe used by more kind of like, he says known critics. What he means is people with like some type of reputation, someone that you could potentially trust, someone with some level of expertise. He pulled up a couple different definitions from different websites, and I found that very interesting. Say, for example, Wikipedia states, in some multiplayer free-to-play games, players who are willing to pay for special items or downloadable content may be able to gain a significant advantage over those playing for free. Critics of such games call them pay-to-win, or P2W. P2W games. A common suggestion for avoiding pay-to-win is that payments should only be used to broaden the experience without affecting the gameplay. Urban Dictionary says pay-to-win when you are paying for an advantage which normal players don't have access to unless they either pay to or will have to grind for very long. When money provides an objectively better experience when playing, meaning that if purchasable content creates a noticeable distinction between the haves and have-nots. Better experience includes in-game advantages such as stronger in-game gear or anything that makes the paying players stand above the free players. Now, you might be wondering, why am I taking the time to kind of describe what this terminology means? Because terminology does matter and it means a lot, especially in the realm of MMOs. To show you, though, the problems of the market and how not using proper terminology and changing the meanings of things can actually have like inconceivable issues, or really I should say irreconcilable issues. Let's scroll down just a little bit here and you'll see exactly what I'm saying. All right, so AMD Riley has this to say. He says, well, I must say your definitions are highly misinforming and the majority of them are summarized and not detailed enough to actually portray what pay to win really is. No source listed. Yes, they are truthful in some aspects, but only one of them that really describes what pay to win truly opinion-based is, and it's one from Urban Dictionary, which is quite ironic. Pay to win is forced upon free players by paywalls. Full stop. That's not how it works. All right. Instead of having to continue to essentially read somebody's opinion with no basis in reality, it's not like comparing to other more readily used definitions of the word either. It's essentially somebody's personal opinion. They think that, well, pay to win isn't pay to win because you can buy items. It's only pay to win because there's a paywall, which means that it's restrictive towards free-to-play players. And so essentially the argument is that if you can buy the item in the game, it's not pay to win. It's not pay to win, right? It's not pay to win. If I can buy the item in game and also buy it in the shop, it's fair, right? It's fair. Okay, well, let's play that out. Okay, let's say that there is an object in the game that gives me 100 strength when I buy it and consume it. That object costs me $20. Let's just make it cheaper. Let's say $9. Cost me $9. All right, so a $9 advantage gives me 100 strength. All right. Now let's say in order to get that item that grants me 100 strength, then I'm going to have to what? Spend 2 weeks to get that item, right? Traditionally. So in 2 weeks, I can get 100 strength, or I can pay $9. Hourly rates for what people get paid, even at like a minimum level in most countries, is going to be at least like $5 to $6, $7, right? $5 to $6, $7. Let's say in 2 weeks you're playing, I don't know, 20 hours a week, which is pretty casual. Let's say $7 after like tax and things like that. Let's say I made, $120 in 2 weeks of play. Well, I could either, saying like in that amount of time, how much I would make if I worked a job. Now I can spend $120 worth of hours, right? Time. Or I could spend $9 worth, which is, by the way, how much time? 0. So would that rhetoric actually make sense? It doesn't, especially when the developers are controlling the rate at which you get these items. If it seems like I bring this up sometimes, and I've brought it up before, it's because this is a big issue that maybe people aren't really like noticing here, is that you have to be able to agree on what pay to win means, right? We have to say that there's a common definition of the term, and we have to kind of, as a group and a community, collectively say we're going to support that definition. If we don't do that, then it becomes more and more difficult to know where the line is drawn, right? If pay to win becomes, well, it's only pay to win if I can't get it in game, then what about people who can add experience boosts in a game? Are you going to say that an experience boost isn't a way to take advantage of a player who, say, for example, wants to pay for convenience? Of course it is. That's the whole point of it. And when they're controlling the experience, that means they control the rate at which you spend or make money, right? Make money. When I say make money, I mean the argument that I brought up of if you played 2 weeks, 20 hours, and you worked $7 an hour for those 20 hours, you've essentially made $140 worth of money, right? Based on that time. So I could do that, or I could spend $10. It's such a no-brainer to me that my brain is naturally going to want to choose the easier option, which is just to buy the thing. So instead of like creating the logic to explain your own purchasing habits or your own willingness to essentially engage in such things like this guy's doing, don't do that. And how about just like when we discuss topics and particular terms, we can just have a more broad discussion about terms. Don't speak like you're an expert is basically what I'm trying to say here. I don't speak as if I'm an expert. Do I know what pay to win means exactly? No, because there isn't an exact definition. It was a term that was essentially invented, right? And it was a term that has gone through a number of changes over the years. The main thing that I want to tell you guys is when it comes to terminology and expectations, look at everybody else. So if you're looking at like pay to win, what is considered pay to win? Do what this guy did. Take the time to find as many definitions of the word as old as you can possibly find them. And then look at what people like this user say nowadays. And you'll start to see the dangers of just changing definitions on a whim. Because next thing you know, if I'm Pearl Abyss or I'm Allodes and I'm seeing this guy's posts, I'm liking this shit. I'm posting this all over the place. And I'm making sure that this becomes the rhetoric now. Because could you imagine for my business how amazing it would be if I operated Black Desert Online and everybody is essentially excusing my microtransactions and they're actually supporting my unfair business practices? I mean, what's better than my customers not only spending money and making me money, but actually defending it? That's the best case scenario. That is the best case scenario. Please don't be that person. You can tell me, man, I spent way too much money on SWTOR. I get it, dude. I've spent money on loot boxes and I've spent money on games, way too much money on games before. But when your ego comes into play and next thing you know, the game that you like is starting to kind of not do so well and people are complaining about microtransactions and you feel a little bit like your feels get triggered. And so you're like, I'm going to take a definition, which is no longer a feels argument, and I'm going to make it a feels argument. Because that's what this is. This is just a feels argument. All right, that was one of my rants. I'll go back to the MMOs and the Go segment so I can finish up some of the other things that I wanted to get to before we end the podcast. We've got about 30 or so minutes left, so if you'd like to get any questions in for the call-in segment, you can start asking them now in chat. I'll just scroll up and look at them, so just feel free to at me in Discord or at me in Twitch chat. Twitch chat's probably easier. I have a little bit of time for a call-in question, but not as much time. So if anybody would like to call in, please wait in the podcast lobby now so I know that I have somebody waiting. And if you'd like to ask me any questions for the ending call-in segment, you can just ask me in Discord or Twitch preferably. The thing that I wanted to get to before I moved on from the MMOs and the Go segment is some recent news concerning Amazon Game Studios and MMO New World. Now, obviously, many of you know that I was involved in some of the early testing of this game. I was an alpha tester. I also got to fly out to Amazon Studios, play the game, and also test it myself. As you can expect, I was under NDA, so I can't really say a whole lot. And I can't wait until I can actually speak more about it. What I can speak about, though, is what's publicly released. And apparently they're suffering layoffs and game cancelizations. At first glance, this might have people who were thinking that New World was going to be the next big thing a little bit worried, but the good news is that actually they're just canceling some of their other projects that they're working on, and that the people that they're letting go have severance packages waiting for them, as well as they're willing to do matching. So these people aren't in danger. They're not just getting thrown out on the street. They're going to get a job. It's just that essentially it seems like Amazon Game Studios kind of made the realization our other projects, our other unannounced projects, they were kind of just test projects. I mean, really, they have this Lumberyard engine that is their proprietary engine that's supposed to allow them to create games at a very astonishing rate. Obviously, Amazon Game Studios hasn't really put out any games yet. I mean, they put out one game that kind of didn't do so well, and it wasn't fully released. It was like a beta or whatever else. The point being, they're just saying, hey, we're going to stop all this other noise, and we're going to focus on New World. And so I wonder what that's going to mean for New World. Are we going to see some new, maybe unique kind of like innovations from that? Are we going to see a completely different game, perhaps? Or maybe kind of, I don't know. Only one way to find out, right? But at first glance, it might have people worried that maybe these layoffs are going to affect New World. And as far as it seems so far, and again, we don't know for sure, it seems as if it won't. I'm not going to sit here and say that it won't automatically just because they say it won't. I don't just blindly assume that what a press release releases is automatically true. But I'm just going to say that, well, it seems as if what they're saying is true. And so maybe New World is going to get that much more focus. And maybe it's the focus that they need in order to kind of differentiate themselves. Because although it certainly is a new hyped MMO that is yet to launch, I don't think it has the same level of hype as other titles, say, for example, like Ashes of Creation or Star Citizen or even like Camelot Unchained. Isn't pay to win self-defining? You pay to win. Paying can lead you to winning. The problem, Carlo Lucas, is like so many people are willing to have very kind of, in my opinion, useless debates about what's considered paying to win. Say, for example, I've had this argument parroted to me because it's essentially when an argument gets parroted, what I mean by parroted is it's essentially somebody else heard the argument and was like, oh, that's a good argument. And they're just saying the argument without actually knowing what their argument is or what it means. And so I see that parroted all the time. They'll say, it's not pay to win because you'd have to spend hundreds of dollars in the game in order for it to be pay to win. It's like, but it still is pay to win by that definition. So it just sounds like you're just excusing the business practice, because I want to have like an actual discussion as to what is considered pay to win, what is considered an advantage, and what is considered me winning. But why are we having discussions as to like how much money is considered pay to win? Like, when was that ever a discussion point? When, since the very beginning of MMOs, you know, relying on free-to-play business models, which was early 2000s, and also like 2005, 2006 on in the Western world, when was it ever about how much money? It was never about how much money. It was about being money, period. It was about having to buy something, period. I know you probably said something about this, but I'm not sure if the NDA covers it. But did you like New World? It's hard to know what exactly I can answer, because I can only really talk about what's publicly released. What I will say is that, and I said this from the very beginning before I was ever involved in the project, so I can, you know, basically stand by that. And it's that I think that A New World is essentially Amazon's answer to the whole survival world, you know, survival game craze. DayZ, Rust, Ark, you name it, all of those different games. It's its own answer to that, you know, kind of like craze, but they're trying to almost like scale it up a little bit. That was kind of my initial idea of what, you know, New World was supposed to be. It was kind of like a newer, maybe rendition, or kind of like a ode to the past in a way. I don't know, like if it's not becoming apparent to you guys, I frankly speaking don't know why games are trying the whole survival world thing still. I don't really know why, to be honest. I don't think it's that great. And here is the reason why I don't think it's that great. It's not great because it lets developers be lazy. And what I mean by lazy is it's like, okay, if you could tell a developer, all right, you can either spend $100 million and everybody will beat your end game within a month. That was SWTOR, by the way. Or you could create a game for $10 million where there's not really an end game. It's kind of just like fighting people, I guess, and like getting resources and keeping them. Why? I don't know. There's no permanence most of the time, so maybe it's just for whatever reason, right? And that one costs $10 million. It doesn't take a genius to know which one they want to choose, right? They want to choose the one that takes the least amount of money, the least amount of developer interaction. Sorry for your ears. Least amount of developer interaction, and it's going to have the biggest return on investment. Putting power into the player is going to do all of that, in my opinion. Allowing players to create their own content, to find their own goals, and create their own forms of progression is essentially way better longevity-wise than having developer-made content, because obviously one is extremely time inclusive and expensive as hell, while the other one is kind of like, well, you can make whatever you want to make, and it's just, what's the point of the game? You can do anything. That's usually what survival games say. Like, they're like, well, the point is you can create and live in a world, and it's like, but why? There's no NPCs here. There's no conflict other than just like attacking people's AFK bases and stealing their things. Why am I doing this again? Are you seeing my problem with survival games? They have none of the same core that MMOs had, which is like a grand narrative or some sort of narrative, period, a world narrative. Not even a grand narrative. I'm not saying be the chosen one, but even just a world narrative, period, right? But it's also developers get so lazy because they don't have to make that much content themselves, and so they stop making as much content. And they think it's just a matter of like, I'll create a sandbox and then just throw a bunch of tools in there, and that's all I got to do, right? And Card and I talk about this all the time. That's not how you do a sandbox game. You don't just have a sandbox. All right, that's how old school sandbox games did it. We need to find a way to bring theme park games and sandbox games maybe a little bit closer together. And that's kind of where the idea of like a sand park game came from. And Arcade was supposed to be that, right? The idea that maybe this game has a lot of sandbox features, but it's still a theme park game, which means that it has a quest system, it has a leveling system, it has a new player experience, and all of those sorts of things. My big belief is that you can take both of those models and essentially marry them. However, that being said, if you want to choose which one keeps the last name, so to say, right? If we're going to talk about marriage, the sandbox always has to keep the last name. Because if it doesn't, it's extremely difficult to start as a theme park game and become a sandbox versus being a sandbox game and have theme park features in it. I'll give you a very, very easy example. Okay, so let's say WoW is the game that I'm designing right now. And I want to make WoW more sandbox. Let's say WoW Classic. I want to make WoW Classic more sandbox. Shit. I mean, I would have to start from the very beginning. Maybe bring back some type of garrison system. Maybe allow clans to claim keeps. Maybe more open world objectives. Maybe players can edit dungeons or something like that. It's really hard to do all of that, right? It's hard to do all of that. However, let's say I have a sandbox game and I'm like, how can I add some theme park features to the sandbox game without just making it a theme park game? Well, I don't have to worry about just making it a theme park game, right? Because it's already based on a sandbox foundation. I've got the sandbox last name, right? I'm nerdSlayer Sandbox instead of nerdSlayer Theme Park. And I want to add some maybe theme park features or aspects into my sandbox game. Well, here's what I do. I add a new player experience with an early game storyline that allows players to learn the mechanics of the game and also enjoy the game, right? Maybe story-wise or gameplay-wise or whatever else. There's one thing I just added to my sandbox game that made it more theme park. Okay. Another one. An arena or some type of battleground system, right? Okay, there's one. Most people do that. All right. What are some other ones, right? Do you see what I'm saying here? It's much easier to add closed circuit systems to an open circuit system than it is adding open circuit systems to a closed circuit system. It's like, imagine trying to upgrade an Apple computer, right? With trying to upgrade an Apple computer with Windows parts or Microsoft parts, or whatever the analogy is in this particular aspect. Try to think of that concept. And for people who aren't aware of like Apple products, they're considered closed circuit, which means you're not really supposed to open them, you're not really supposed to tamper with them, and you're not really supposed to like put your own graphics card in them, right? It's a closed circuit. Now imagine having a closed circuit and then trying to essentially build your own computer. How? Like, how do you build your own Mac? You know what I'm saying? Like, is it possible? Absolutely. I'm sure people have, figured out how to do that. But you see what I'm saying, right? It's much more difficult than just getting a Windows computer and just changing all the parts like whenever you want. Like, like if I'm gonna make my own computer, I can add in any kind of graphics card I want to it. Versus if I buy some completely like closed circuit, system, then I'm not going to be able to upgrade it. It's going to be very difficult for me to add new things to it. And when I say new things, I don't just mean a new, quest line. I mean a new feature, a new tool system, a new gameplay aspect. Say, for example, digging or flying or, other mechanics like that. Look at why flying as a mechanic in WoW is so problematic. Because it's theme park. You can just fly everywhere. There's, like, what stops me from being in a PvP engagement in a TBC zone and then just flying away, right? Not a whole lot stops me, but maybe if I'm in this open world environment and you have a flying system, that means you have to introduce some type of system to go with a flying system, right? Because in a sandbox game, a system isn't just that. It's not just one system. And what I mean by that is crafting. Let's use survival games as an example. Crafting, on its own isn't just the system. It's crafting as well as losing resources, scarcity of resources, possible fights and using of the resources, right? Crafting is more than just making things, because if you just made things and there was no cost for making things and there was no deterioration, no durability loss, then you kind of just would create things and then that would be the end of the story, right? But crafting has other aspects that support it, just like in any sandbox feature or a big sandbox feature in a game has to have that. It has to have support. Kind of like if you want to have a good economy, guess what you need? A good crafting system. It just goes hand in hand, right? You need certain systems to help support other systems. That's why the problem with having a theme park game, which once again is a closed circuit, you're trying to add support systems to a game that doesn't have it. So not only do you need to add a support system, you need to add the feature as well. Sorry, not only do you need to add a feature, you need to add the support system. So not only am I adding, for example, player housing, I'm adding way more than that, right? Because if I just do player housing in a theme park way, well, then you have what most games do these days, which is just you have an instance, there's your house, congratulations. Nobody gives a shit, basically. No one cares. They don't see your house. How many people go to your house in those games when they're completely instanced? I mean, not a whole lot, right? But in Star Wars Galaxies or even like another good example is, what's another? Survival games. Go back to survival games. People are going to visit your house all the time, your guild base of operations. I mean, in fact, in Galaxies, people were living in houses. They were living in guild halls. They were always interacting in buildings and things like that. That's because, once again, they didn't just make it to where you could craft a house. That wasn't how they came up with the system. That's just the very, very, very beginning of it. they also had to create support systems for that feature. Say, for example, more ways in which you could customize your house is a support system. More ways in which you could, for example, invite and allow people to affect your house is another support system, right? That doesn't just all come with just making a structure, right? There's a lot more that goes into it. Yeah, I was kind of thinking of that myself, Leva. I was like, why not just bring garrisons back to classic WoW and try and find a way to kind of introduce them with like guild conflict? That's just one of my ideas, like just running around in my head. I want to talk more about real classic ideas, like classic WoW ideas, when I can talk to people like Asmongold, you know, Eastfand and Preach, Soda Poppin', basically streamers and content creators who have been integral in the whole like WoW process. I'd like to talk to those people and hear what their opinions are of like maybe things that you could add, because you'd be surprised. There's a lot of, you know, very dedicated WoW fans who have some great ideas for what to add to their game to make it more sandbox. Because despite the idea that was always spouted back then that theme park games are the best and that's just it, it's like theme park games are great when they're great. They're shitty when they're shitty. And what I mean by that is not, you know, I know Limpos is going to be like, oh, sandbox games are the same. But here's what I mean. In the theme park game, WoW, whenever it came out with Battle for Azeroth, tanked. It did not do very well. Why did its population hurt so much after an expansion? I mean, aren't they playing the rest of the game? Why does the expansion matter so much? Well, because the expansion makes all of the other content kind of not really that useful, right? And so that's why it matters so much. When your theme park game is doing well, better keep doing well, because as soon as you start having that downturn, your population just drops, hard drops, because now you have another year or two to make another expansion that possibly won't satisfy your audience yet again. And when you're talking about millions of dollars on the line, like in the case of WoW, it's kind of easy to see why maybe they're pivoting towards classic WoW now, right? I don't even know if they're sure what to do with modern WoW exactly. And I think that's been pretty much proven since they kept putting off patches and things like that. We had a crafting guild that had an entire city on Corellia. A huge city with tons of cash flowing through it, protected and attacked by PvP guilds over and over. Really cool gameplay could come from it. Player housing basically facilitated a lot of the PvP. Totally agree. And especially GCW wise, that was Galactic Conquest. Like the whole PvP system in Galaxies was kind of predicated on the idea of having territory. Because, you know, you bunkers and things like that, right? I remember doing so many bunker events whenever I was younger, where you'd like land on a planet and then you would have to go assault a bunker, and it was just like, player housing does facilitate combat. Absolutely. ArcAge was the same way. In fact, I think that's a big reason why ArcAge had some pretty decent open world PvP, was because they had player housing. So let's give them some credit for that. Asmongold's position seems to be mostly he wouldn't mind additional content, but he doesn't trust current Blizzard, so he would be more content with a TBC release. I think that although that reasoning totally makes sense, the problem with it is that I could never see the same way. And that's because we come from different perspectives. Asmongold loves WoW, and WoW is his favorite game, right? WoW is not my favorite game. I don't really have a favorite, you know, MMO per se, because my favorite MMO is the next best MMO, right? Like I care about the market more so than I care about individual games these days. So really what I want to see is just the market thriving. I don't need a particular game myself to feel like, oh, everything's great now. Like, I'll play this game forever. I just want to see some more good games in general. Like, I'm not as individually invested as much into WoW. And so I bring that up to describe that, you know, my decisions and my thought process comes from the perspective of the overall market. So I'm sorry, I don't care what the OG, you know, vanilla fans who just want to keep vanilla, and I'm not saying Asmongold's one of those, because I don't really think he is exactly, but I get that. I get the vanilla crowd. That's totally cool. That's totally your opinion. I'm not the least bit interested in staying the same. Sorry. My personal belief in life, and also just in the way that the MMO market has to function, is that you have to move forward. Have to move. Otherwise, we're going to keep playing the same games, right? Someone has to innovate. When are we going to get to virtual reality? We're not going to get there by, you know, taking our time and keep playing the same old games over and over again, which is why I make it a point to highlight, yes, classic WoW is going to be fun. Yes, I'm going to play it and stream it and enjoy it, but for a long time? And what does it mean for the market as a whole? That's what I'm more interested in finding out. Not, is this game going to last X amount of years of playing? Because that's just the simplistic way to look at it. Have I played Star Wars Galaxy's Legends? I have. What do you think about the new mobile games similar to Pokemon Go coming out? Like that Dragon Quest game, the Minecraft one, and the Harry Potter one. I know most MMORPG fans are really skeptical on those games, but I think some of the ideas they bring are interesting. If they ever made a similar game with all the depth of a good traditional MMORPG, I'd say it would be great. I'm totally fine with mobile companions. Card and I have talked about this. There is a world in a complete like deep pool of information, or sorry, ideas that hasn't even been tapped into in regards to companion games or companion mobile apps. And I mean, there's plenty of examples of this, but I would like more kind of companion-based things. Like, say, for example, if I'm playing on my mobile phone, maybe I get access to like a mechanic that doesn't exist in the real game, and so I can play whenever I'm away from my computer. You know, like I can't deny that I like that aspect, but I don't want to play an MMO on my laptop, or sorry, on my phone. That's my main thing, is I don't really want to play an MMO on it, but if you gave me things that I could affect in the game, maybe I could mess with the auction house, right? Or maybe I could, I don't know, use guild chat. Maybe I could even set up some of my crafting recipes to auto-craft or something. Point being is there's ways in which they could introduce fun and inventive ways of new gameplay elements and finding fun ways to combine phones and the PC. The problem with that is that the current market doesn't want that. They don't want companion stuff. They want a complete, like, replacement. The Korean market wants Korean MMOs on the mobile phone to blow up. Why? The money is just too damn good on the mobile phone. It's crazy the money they make on these mobile phone games. I've talked about this so much already, and there's so much statistics out there. So if you're curious, just go watch my video called Microtransactions in the Pay-to-Win Saga. I talked about all of this stuff in detail. That's crazy to think about, though. The amount of money that they make off of mobile games. We're talking hundreds of millions of dollars every quarter. Every quarter, guys. So if you're wondering why a company like NCSoft considers Guild Wars 2 a failure, right? They're saying that it's a failure. They mean commercially. Because all of those mobile reboots of Blade and Soul 5, you know, the mobile edition, and Lineage, Revolution, whatever else they have these days, those games, as low effort as they might be, as much as, you know, prim and proper, try-hard nerds like myself wearing this fedora and many of you in chat, we might cry about that whole idea and be like, oh, come on, mobile games, like, who cares? But it's working. It's making a lot of money. So I think instead of making mobile games the enemy, let's find a way to make them our friend. And why not just have them as like companions or other ways in which you could play the game or interact with the game that don't take away from the experience. Maybe you let somebody play on their phone, but you don't really make concessions for that. And what I mean by that, this is something that many PC fans are very, very familiar with if you've ever played a port. Why don't people like a port? Well, a port is essentially a game that was released on a platform that was then released on another platform and had to be kind of like jerry-rigged to work properly. It wasn't actually released on that platform. The main problem I have with mobile games is, like, let's say if you want to do, I don't know, a certain game as a mobile game. Well, it better be like RuneScape. Because if I can't get the same experience I can get playing RuneScape on my phone as I get on my laptop or on my computer, I'm not really going to want to play it. And I get that that's me, and maybe other people feel the same or don't feel the same way. But that's why I think if you can't get your gameplay experience as close to possible, meaning it's not just a port, it's actually a supported way to play the game, I think that's totally fine if it's a supported way to play the game. What I don't like is all of these ports where essentially, even if they did launch it on PC, you're playing a mobile game on the PC. And a perfect example of this, and the reason why I could never, ever for a long time play the game, that's Albion Online. Sorry. Albion Online was designed for iPads and phones. You guys are going to try and convince me to play that on the PC and tell me it's anywhere close to the other experiences I can get on the PC? I mean, come on. And All right, where's the soapbox? Where's my soapbox? Albion is one of those other games that makes me really, really, really want to rant, okay? I was on the MMORPG subreddit the other day, last week maybe, and somebody brought up the point, oh, you should go play Albion Online if you're looking for an open world PvP game. It's got this, it's great, it's blah, 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 amazing. It's just like Darkfall, it's just like Warhammer, and it's just like League of Legends. And I was like, false on all three of those. It is not like those games at all. It looks like a MOBA. It's not League of Legends because it looks like a MOBA. It looks like a MOBA, not looks like League of Legends. Like, that rhetoric is just so crazy to me. Whenever people are like, why why don't play Albion Online Part 2? It is because, like, people, it's kind of like, you know, the whole Dark Souls thing. I know people complain about, oh, it's Souls-like. And it's like Dark Souls, and it's kind of like used as like a marketing tool. I hate whenever people bring up Albion Online, and they're like, man, it's just like League of Legends. It's awesome. And I'm like, okay, well, let's see if that's the case. Albion Online PvP. Alright, so it's isometric. You've got a number of abilities, just like in a MOBA. Alright. But what about this looks like League of Legends? Because it has abilities? League of Legends wasn't the first MOBA, so how does it look like League of Legends? I don't think it looks like League of Legends at all. In fact, let's look at League of Legends. Does that game look like this game? Watch how fast he's moving his mouse. Watch how much he has to click. You might be wondering, why is he clicking that much? Because he's trying to have full control over his character model. The other guy was clicking like every 5 seconds. This guy's clicking every second. Every split second he's clicking. He has to, in order to input this amount of commands and get the amount of movement that he needs, right? If he wants to get a CS, right, he has to be properly close enough to where he can auto-attack them and also, potentially, as you saw there, not get harassed. Is this really the same kind of, like, complexity you see in Albion? No, there's no mechanics in Albion that are anywhere close to this. Let's look up a perfect example of like a top player in League of Legends doing some like crazy mechanical stuff. Everybody knows Double Lift at this point, I feel like, so he's a good example to use. Let's skip ahead to where maybe some actual fighting is going to happen. All right, so here's he's playing Jinx. He's making sure that he keeps his character far enough away to attack at max radius, while also not getting close enough so he can get hit by CC, right? Very common concepts in team fights and things like that. Now, you see how he flashed over the wall there? He made a big play. He made that play on his own volition. He knew that he could get it, and he knew he would get the speed boost after getting the other kill. So that was a mechanical play that he decided to make right in that moment, and I can see that even as a former player and realize that. The problem with like thinking that Albion Online is anywhere close to this is that you're not realizing that this game was designed for mobile games. It can't be like League of Legends. The movement isn't nearly as... Look at how slow he has to click away whenever he's auto-attack moving here. Watch this. He is attack moving here in a second. Watch this. Attack move, and then clicks away. There's a full second delay in between his attacks. Guys, in League of Legends, there's like 2.5 attacks a second sometimes. Every second, right? Some people are attacking 2 times a second. Think about the amount of inputs you have to put in order to match that kind of, like, mechanics. If it seems like I'm ranting about this, it's because I am. It's not even close to the same kind of game, and I'm tired of people saying that Albion Online is like League of Legends. It's not like League of Legends, okay? It's not. And another example. Oh, it's like Darkfall. It's like Darkfall. This game is 3D. The entire game is based on projectiles. The entire game is based on projectiles. Everything is aimed in the game. Everything is aimed. How on earth is that isometric game anything like Quake, the MMO, which is essentially how I describe Darkfall? Because it has PvP? A big pet peeve of mine is when people use comparisons that are not even close to the same like comparison. Just because things have PvP doesn't mean you can compare them. And then other examples people brought up are EVE Online. Oh, Albion Online's just like EVE Online, right? It's just like EVE Online. So you're telling me that Albion Online can have a battle the scale of this? Thousands of players in the same instance? You're telling me Albion Online can even come close to the scale of this game? Of giant, massive ships and battles happening over, like, you know, a specific station or whatever, right? Now, I'm trying to skip ahead to show the political map. You're telling me this exists in Albion? This is the same comparison? This is the same kind of game experience? It's not even close, guys. It's not even close, okay? And so, I know I don't play Albion Online, and many of you are like, we get it, dude. You don't play the game. The reason why I made a point to rant about this, though, is that anytime somebody makes a comparison, just a little food for thought. Actually take it serious. Like, I mean, like, when someone makes a comparison, they're like, hey, Albion Online is like League of Legends, Darkfall, and EVE. I would go look at those games, see what they are, and then be like, is Albion Online like those games? Well, I can tell you from experience, because I played them all. It's not really. I mean, does it have PvP, open world PvP with, like, resources? Okay. Does it have abilities like a MOBA? Okay. Is it isometric like a MOBA? Right? Can you have a lot of people in the same, like, instance? You could, right? A lot of people in the same area, okay. But what about all the other ways that you could compare them? Like gameplay, difficulty, mechanics, time spent, variety, depth of play, right? Complexity, social interactions, are they the same? Is the alliance or political intrigue the same? Yeah, I'm not even gonna answer that one. You be the judge, guys. If you ever think I'm being mean or being unreasonable, just play out the premises yourself and see what you think about them. And I've tried playing them out, and I can never see how they're really related. Like, tangentially, sure. But I think it means a lot to say when a game is like this game. That means a lot to me. When somebody says, hey, this game's like Jedi Academy, I'm like, I want to play this game? And if I played that game, and it wasn't like Jedi Academy, guess what the first thing I would do is? I'll let you guys guess this one. What's the first thing I would do if I heard that a game was like Jedi Academy? Like, let's say they said Jedi Fallen Order is just like Jedi Academy, or it's like Jedi Academy. I'd be like, awesome, I want to go play this game. And I'd pick up the game, and I'd be like, this is not like Jedi Academy. It's not about Jedi Academy. It's not. I know you're sensitive here, Limpos, but can you make an actual argument? It's not actually like that. That's a false claim. It's not correct. It's just the same thing as saying, oh, you know, actually, I won't even say that joke. It's fine. I go off the rail the same way when people compare ESO to mainline TS. Are you trying to kill me, Alundris? Are you trying to make my blood boil today? Are you going to make me bring up that argument too? Because that's another really good example, and I'm glad you brought that one up. Of where people are like, it's great for an Elder Scrolls game. Elder Scrolls Online is great for an Elder Scrolls game. Okay. Again, when people make claims, the only thing I do is just hold them accountable. That's all I'm doing. I'm just holding them accountable. Okay, so let's see if Elder Scrolls Online is like the best, you know, Elder Scrolls game. Let's be more generous. We'll go to Somerset. That's a more recent expansion. We'll go to Metacritic on some. Metacritic has been taking forever to load, by the way. I'm not sure why, but yesterday it took me at least like 2 minutes to load a page. Now let's compare Metacritic to, I don't know, what's a pretty popular Elder Scrolls game? Skyrim, you ever heard of it? Well, 94%. Maybe they just mean, like, Morrowind. Maybe it's higher rated than Morrowind. It's not higher rated than Morrowind either. Maybe Daggerfall. 8.3 according to this one. That's still lower score. So is Elder Scrolls Online the best Elder Scrolls game? Objectively, no, it isn't. What about subjectively? Well, you could make some arguments there, right? I think I'm not going to make those arguments, but I'm sure you could make some arguments. That's one of those things that drives me crazy. Is like Elder Scrolls Online, one of the best Elder Scrolls games. But is it actually though? I mean, did you actually compare them? Because if you compare them, it's not. But then people bring up the argument, well, it's an MMO. You can't compare them. That's what somebody said to me whenever I said that Albion Online was nothing like League of Legends. Actually, let me read the exact guy's point, because I think it's maybe there's something to be learned there. Let's see. All right, here we go. He said he felt dirty about saying Albion Online is surprisingly fun. So here was me just basically being like, is it anything like those games, really? And I was downvoted, right? Naturally, right? And so this guy says, well, given those three, it's LOL. It's obviously LOL. Unsurprising, it doesn't have as much depth as a game that's been released for far much longer. So now the goalpost is, well, it's like LOL. It's just it needs more time to be like LOL. Well, if only I didn't play LOL in beta. But I did. I did play the game in beta. So I can say, watching the game here in beta, I don't know, it still looks faster and more mechanical than Albion, doesn't it? Like, sorry, forgive the graphics. These are ancient. Let's see if we can find a faster team fight. Man, this just brings back memories. All right, here's a guy getting a tower kill, and then he's gonna like use his dash. Come on, they don't even show that moment. All right, here's a team fight. I don't know, guys. League is still looking pretty fast, even in beta. How old is this gameplay now? I mean, it's over 8 years old. It still looks faster. So it's just like, all I do is just hold people accountable for the points that they make. And I know Limpos doesn't like that because he'd rather me just essentially never converse with anybody else who's not him or my current audience who already agrees with everything I say. But sometimes when somebody makes a claim, I just want to hold them accountable to it. So if you say, for example, that PvP MMOs are destined to fail, then I'm going to ask that you can explain that. Like, show me proof. Show me proof of MMOs showing that they're destined to fail. Or if somebody says, well, theme park games are just better than sandbox games. Okay, well then prove that then. But comparisons are something that don't get as like meticulously picked apart, and I feel like they should be. Because yes, you can say something is of the same genre, right? Darkfall and EVE Online are also MMOs. So if that's the argument you want to make, that they're kind of like Albion because they're MMOs, well, I mean, nobody with a brain is going to argue against that. But are they anywhere really close to like the same gameplay loops? Nah, they aren't. So I don't really think they're similar. But that's just my rant. The only thing I haven't told you guys about today that I wanted to go over was, let's see. I have a thread here, but I don't remember what this one was about. No, I think that's about everything that I wanted to cover with you guys. I'll go ahead and switch it over to the call-in segment. So if you have any questions, just feel free to ask me. It can be about anything we've discussed already, or if you just want to ask me completely, something random that has nothing to do with anything we've already discussed, then feel free, just at me in chat. And I'll let this run for about like 8 to 10 minutes or so, and then I've got to skedaddle because maybe we went over it already. Well, I mean, earlier, Limpos, you said, for example, you said the specific claim you made was, I'm scrolling back to read. Yeah, you said that, to answer my question, you said to rant about it 5 times. Which clearly shows that you have a bias against me bringing up the particular topic because you don't want me to discuss essentially very important issues, which are people that make comparisons that aren't anywhere close to being an accurate comparison, which is used as marketing, by the way. It is used for subversive reasons sometimes. So just to think like it's only when your friend suggests a game to you is silly, because developers are doing the same thing. They're saying all the right words, all the right terminology. They're saying all the right things for you guys. And that's how they're kind of making people keep buying these games. So that's kind of why I'm like, when people make comparisons, just hold them accountable, because developers say it all the time. For example, I'll tell you guys one that Guild Wars 2 said over and over again whenever I was sitting in their auditorium as they were explaining us about the game, or explaining to us what the game was and what it meant. They said, oh, we love Dark Age of Camelot. We want to make a PvP experience that rivals Dark Age of Camelot. Actual quote. That's actually what they said. I was there at PAX listening in the convention. And so I was like, okay, now we have something to work towards. And then Guild Wars 2's World versus World system came out, and I was like, this isn't like Dark Age of Camelot. It's kind of like it, because 3 factions, I guess, like Tri-Realm PvP. I mean, is that the bar now? If it's just like 3 factions, it's like Dark Age of Camelot's PvP? Or if it has full loot, it's like Darkfall? You see what I'm saying? It's like, I remember hearing that back then used as a way to sell the game. It's like Dark Age of Camelot. No, it wasn't. It never was. They took the basic idea and like made that an instance. That's not like Dark Age of Camelot. They miss so many other aspects that go with it. But that shit gets used for marketing and gets used to sell shit all the time. Guild Wars 2 is just better than Guild Wars 1. Did anybody ask a question? I forgot if I missed one. I was trying to scroll up. What are we discussing? Oh, I forgot, Arcadian. Sorry, I missed your question. Yeah, I broke a bead of sweat off of that one. Oh, Arcadian, is that you, Zelda? That's messaging me right now? I'll get to your question in a second. I do accept Discord DMs. I mean, pretty much everybody can DM me. I'm an open book when it comes to contacting me. So if you ever have any questions, or you'd like to ask me about something or just talk to me about something, feel free. I just can't guarantee that I'm going to get to you right away, obviously. I will get to you, but I just can't guarantee I'll do it right away. Ludus. Can you tell me more about how ESO doesn't feel like an Elder Scrolls game? No, man, I want to make a video about that. Don't torture me, dude. Don't torture me, okay? Don't torture me. Limpos is already torturing me today. No one says the right things to me. That comment was in regards to this game is like Jedi Academy. Oh, you mean about Jedi Academy? Oh, yeah, sorry. It was another excuse to talk about Jedi Academy. I get it now. I think that MMORPGs didn't fully reap the benefits of modern technology. As in, for example, many things didn't improve in the MMORPG worlds. Like, they are not as massive than they used to be. The games can handle a massive amount of people in the same zone, just like in the past. Do you agree with that statement? And if so, why do you think that is? I think it's a number of things. I think oftentimes publishers and investors who essentially had all the money. So let's just start from the beginning. I'll give you guys like a Spark Notes example, or my Spark Notes rendition of like MMO history. Okay. So way back when, we had nerds with pens and papers, and they were just like, hey, let's play games together and let's make some characters. All right, and then next thing you know, people were like, let's keep using the same characters. I don't want to get rid of my character. I want to keep playing the same character. And then we had some level of permanence in storytelling. Then after a while, people were like, hey, the internet is a thing. Maybe we can do this whole D&D thing on the internet. And so we can meet on chat sites and we can have text-based communication, because back then games were text-based. And so people would role play and PvP using text, right? And eventually graphics started to evolve. And so you had 2D games and 3D games, and that's the rise of games like Meridian 59, Ultima Online, EverQuest 1, and many, many other games. But that was kind of the initial start of games, the early 90s. Those games were all extremely ambitious, but kind of lacked the funding and, frankly speaking, the knowledge to kind of accomplish what they were trying to accomplish. So it was a lot of like messing up and learning on the job. And then EverQuest 1 kind of blew up, right? And it was the first real commercial MMO to blow up. And once that game blew up, it kind of changed things because it made people realize that maybe there's a formula here. And when you think about what a formula is, essentially a formula from the perspective of an investor or a developer or publisher is like, we can do this again, right? That's what the formula means. It's like, we could do this again. And so obviously everybody knows at this point, WoW came out in 2004 and kind of set the whole world ablaze. It changed the market and how MMOs functioned before. That was the first time that we had a pre-existing, successful company make a venture into the world of MMOs, really. I mean, we had never seen such a well-respected company as Blizzard make a stab at making an MMO. Just look at the statistics. Look at the early games and who they were founded by. They were not founded by companies like Blizzard. Blizzard was the first company, the real company who had already made other kinds of games, who was like, you know what, we're going to make an MMO, our world at our scale, our way. It changed everything, right? It changed everything. Then people started to realize, well, they figured out the formula. So that means that we'll just copy what the formula is. The problem is that if you don't understand the ingredients, even if you have the ingredients and you have the instructions of how to bake a cake, you might still bake it wrong. And a perfect example of this is like, I watch a lot of baking shows. And so oftentimes you think that mixing things is kind of pointless. Like mixing, like, all right, I mixed it enough. Well, if you don't mix the icing enough, sometimes it completely changes the texture. It changes the way the cake tastes. It changes the way that it eats as well. And so that's kind of my analogy with food and MMOs. It's like people knew the ingredients, eggs, milk, butter, wheat, like whatever it was, right? They knew the ingredients, but maybe they didn't know the quality of the ingredients, and they also didn't necessarily know what the ingredients meant. They were just kind of like, okay, arena, battlegrounds, class systems, level 1 to 60, new player experience, and you have theme park quests that guide you all the way through that. Okay, so let's do that. So then they started doing that. The problem is that everybody started doing it. So then all of a sudden games started to seem quite similar. And the only differences were essentially the IPs. And you can look back in the period between 2005 or 2006 to 2011. Many of those games are quite similar. Many of them are quite similar. The only thing that they're unique in are maybe like specific aspects with their IP. So say, for example, Age of Conan is very, very similar of a game to Arcade, despite them coming from completely like different eras, if you will. However, they're different in a couple key ways that kind of make sense, right? Age of Conan is more action-oriented, right? Because it's the Conan franchise. Whereas Arcade is not an established franchise, and so therefore it's kind of like whatever they elect it to be. After a while, though, when people got tired of the games being the same game, it essentially became you only played the best competitors of that market. And so let's say we had 100 MMOs, and all of them were some amalgamation of the same mechanics. The way it ended up, shaking out was that the 5 most popular games are the 5 biggest. So you have the biggest companies, Square Enix working with Final Fantasy, ZeniMax working with Elder Scrolls, Blizzard working with WoW, obviously, and then, of course, you can bring up Guild Wars 2 and NCSoft, the biggest MMO publisher. Those are like the big 4 right now, or big 5. I can't remember if I said the 5th one, but those are like the big 4 MMOs right now. And why is that essentially? Well, because they're the biggest companies, right? They can afford to do the most generalistic model and work. A lot of other companies couldn't. And so when that no longer worked, we kind of had this drought in the MMO world. And during this time, the actual reason there was a drought was because developers weren't able to get investors and publishers as excited to make new and innovative games anymore. They essentially were no longer willing to risk hundreds of millions of dollars on an idea, right? Like some innovative idea. Investors were like, you know what? It needs to have all the same things that WoW has. We need to know that it's already somewhat of a proven commodity, so we're not just going to put all of this risk to waste. And that's kind of why so many games started copying off of each other, is because they were like, well, we can't afford to make games, so the indie market is non-existent, right? You need a lot of money in order to function in the MMO realm. Where that changed a little bit is kind of where we're at now. Is Kickstarter started to kind of pick up, the investors and MMO publishers started to kind of fade away, and they're not as prevalent anymore. And now developers are once again more willing to take risk, more willing to go outside of the typical realms of funding and try and go directly to the audience themselves, so they can make the exact kind of game that they want to make for that particular audience. So the question I was asked by Zelda in chat was, do you reckon that implementing a system that makes it so certain classes, like professions, get bonuses to item drop chance and drop amount, as well as maybe exclusive crafting tiers, would be a good way to make that aspect of any MMORPG better? Item drop chance, that's interesting. You know, I haven't thought about it a whole lot, but what I will say is that it does make it to where you could have an ecosystem surrounding the professions. Say, for example, maybe if you're like a rogue, you drop like work tools or something like that. And maybe other people can still loot those types of things, but specifically whenever you kill a monster, you have a higher propensity to get that type of item. I think that's, I don't want to speak, you know, I don't want to get too far ahead of myself, basically. I haven't thought enough about it, but I don't see a whole lot of negative reasons to do such a thing like that. I do like the idea of exclusive crafting tiers, though. That's something that I think Galaxy's had down correct. Being a shipwright wasn't just making a bunch of ships, right? It was a particular kind of merchant, a particular kind of trader, in the same way that a chef was, right? And so they operated differently. They didn't just make different things. Same price, though? I mean, it would be the same price, right? Oh, sorry, you guys talking about something else? I don't know about discouraging some professions from harvesting certain resources or doing certain crafting, but definitely encouraging some professions focusing on specific types of resources and crafting roles with their own exclusive tiers due to proficiency, because that will be more efficient. Yeah, and it also goes hand in hand with the things that I mentioned earlier. If you make professions and classes essentially married, then you can make it to where gameplay aspects affect the way your class plays. So let's say you have a certain level of smuggling skill. The higher your smuggling skill, the better you'll be able to smuggle, which makes you money and maybe gets you like rare items or something like that. And you could make it also essentially, you know, you could take this idea that you're presenting and kind of throw it in there as well. Increase item chances and drop them out for particular items for particular professions who would obviously need them. I'm not against it. I'm just wondering about the specifics in terms of programming, how difficult it would be to do, because I haven't seen it done yet. And so anytime I haven't seen something done, I kind of have to rely on people who are a little bit more smart than me in regards to gameplay aspects, which are going to be programmers, because they're the ones that know how to make it work, right? What do you think about the prospects of Overwatch 2? I think Overwatch 2 is going to be sold primarily for a single-player campaign, so they can probably tack on another $30 and sell it at $60. But if you mean like the online environment, to be honest, I don't even know what to expect anymore with Blizzard. I really don't. Like, I don't really know what they're going for sometimes. The loot boxes and stuff like that, that might put them in trouble in certain respects with Overwatch and the way that they monetize it, so maybe they will just go for like a campaign and try and monetize that. I guess what I'm asking is, I just don't know if they're going to change the way that they handle their kind of philosophy with how the game works. And what I mean more specifically is your game a hero shooter? Or is it a MOBA? Or is it a shooter? Like, what exactly is the game? I think that's my biggest problem with Overwatch, is it feels like you're playing a MOBA, and yet you don't have the same control over the game as if you would when you're playing a MOBA. And then not to mention, it feels like a shooter because you can aim, but then it's not the same level of control over aiming because so many abilities are so powerful. You can't get by off of just having good aim. With Classic WoW coming out, do you think MMOs with a fixed final state can be successful? By fixed state, I mean you have a perfect best in slot item that is fixed. No Titan forging it randomly or random roll that can make it, or that can make very slight improvements. So basically what you're saying is that there's a power ceiling, right? There's a power ceiling and you can't go past that power ceiling. I think power ceilings are okay as long as there's enough variety in which you could like realize that, if that makes sense. So if two warriors are both best in slot gear, right? But they play very differently, I would be cool with that. Even if they had like similar kind of stats or whatever, but they played differently. And I think that's one thing people missed about Classic WoW was actually the itemization mattering a lot. Like your trinket choice and your ring choice and maybe even your weapon. Like so many things mattered, right? Your enchantments and things like that, transcriptions, like more things matter than just like, okay, I have this trinket and it's automatically the best trinket, so I have to use it. There was a lot of trinkets in Classic WoW that are kind of like, maybe they're useful in this scenario, but maybe not so useful in other scenarios. And so there was a lot more instances in which you would have people with unique abilities or unique skills. And so it wasn't so monochromatic where everyone's the same color. That's my fear of a power ceiling ultimately, is if it's too easily defined, then yeah, everyone's playing the same shit, right? And that was kind of a big problem in Guild Wars 2, if I may actually. Guild Wars 2, a big problem was in Guild Wars 1, class selection and customization was so grand that there was never a true meta. Never a true meta. I'm not going to sit here and say prot monks weren't part of the meta. Okay, fair enough. Prot monks and splitters are part of the meta in Guild Wars. I get it. That being said, come on. You can play a bunny thumper, which is basically a ranger who runs around with a hammer. And that can be an actual competitive spec. You see what I'm saying? Like, there was so much variety that there was never this feeling of like a ceiling. You always felt like more people were coming up with new ideas and it was always feeling new and fresh. That's kind of my problem with maybe more so item-based systems, is that unless there's enough variety, I mean, best in slot eventually reaches its point where kind of you have your ceiling and that's kind of it. At that point, there has to be enough skill and enough like variety in the way that you play the game in order to still make it unique or exciting enough. The question is how many people still play it. Crown Store is not very useful. Oh, you guys are talking about ESO? Newer games have more global audience and better tech. Yeah, that's not always true in the MMO world. Let me tell you about Bless Online launching for the 6th time and, you know, basically all of us Western fans celebrating the relaunch of a game that launched in Korea. That launched in Korea years ago, and then trying to be excited about it all. My tinfoil hat. The only reason they still update Skyrim Remastered is so they can push Creation Club mods. It's kind of interesting that SWTOR didn't succeed even if they had the money backing. I mean, I guess it's interesting in the sense of like the amount of money at stake was interesting, but I've never seen a more obvious problem than in hindsight with SWTOR. Because, you know, I was fortunate enough to be there for many of the original, you know, kind of like revelations, I guess, like from players, you know, being one of the first players to test the game and also test it on the floor and talk to developers. The biggest thing I noticed was that the developers essentially reached the point where they knew that the tech was not going to improve. And that was when I kind of was a little bit worried about the future of SWTOR. Was early on when we saw how much performance issues were still plaguing the game in open beta and closed beta. We were kind of like, maybe that means they can't really fix it. And that's what had us the most, I think, terrified about it all. Is like, you guys just spent $200 million on your game. It's already outdated. Completely outdated gameplay-wise. And I think, frankly speaking, the best thing about it is its writing. But if you take that writing and maybe dialogue selection choice and you put that in like the secret world, I think the secret world just essentially trumps whatever SWTOR has remaining, right? All right, it looks like I don't have many other questions except this last one from Artifact Gamer. Did you try Kurtzpell? And if so, what did you think about it? I did not try it. I'll tell you guys, like, my personal philosophy and how I choose a game to try out and also choose a game to report on for you guys. Essentially, I try and choose the games that obviously are going to have the biggest impact in the market. Like Classic WoW right now is going to have the biggest impact in the market. So I want to cover the games that the majority of people are going to want me to cover. But if you're asking, like, how do I choose maybe like smaller MMOs and which ones I want to cover in that respect, you just kind of have to like think about the things that interest me the most. The things that interest me the most are community, right? Community interactions, right? With my audience and also the community of the game that I'm playing. So if I could marry those two together, that's why I'm excited for Classic WoW. I want to marry my audience with the community of the game. If I can combine those, then I can have events and it'll be fun and enjoyable, right? But let's say, you know, a new game comes out and you're trying to wonder if, like, I would try the game out. The biggest things to look for are going to be, does the world take itself seriously as a world? And what I mean by that is, like, does it have rules in which it follows? Does it have, like, a lore system? Does it have conflict that makes sense between 2 factions, 3 factions, however many factions they have? Basic things like that. And if you ask why does that matter to me, how I've become kind of in my older age now, being 26 years old, whenever I play an MMO, if it doesn't immediately hook me into the world, I'm not interested. And why am I not interested? Because I've been spoiled, guys. I played many great MMOs. I don't have to subject myself to bad games. And this is a rhetoric that I cannot stand, that I see so much of Black Desert Online that drives me insane. People are like, dude, you need to have a max level character in that game, and you need to play this game religiously, and you need 200 hours in this game before you could talk about it. And it's like, no, I don't. I think the game's shit. I gave you a reasoning and a whole video to explain why I think it's shit. You can agree or disagree, but ultimately speaking, I don't have to play the game. I already know I'm not going to like the game. I've already played it. As soon as I'll tell you guys my experience playing Black Desert Online. And this was back at, like, I don't even remember what convention it was, so sorry if I can't remember exact time, but it was before it had came to America fully. And I remember I found out so early in the game that you could auto walk and auto follow and things like that, and kind of like send your guy to the next quest hub. As soon as that happened, this is what happened to my eyes. They like glossed over. Like, if I could show you guys what it looks like whenever your eyes gloss over, it's like, then all of a sudden you become like lifeless. And it's like, okay, if I remain in my lifeless state of essentially realizing that this world as it exists is not a world in any way, shape, or, you know, form, I can accept that and then just play the game for its gameplay alone, right? And the gameplay it provides. Or I can just don't play the game. And so essentially, if the game doesn't have those aspects, gameplay better be damn good. Because if it isn't, what reason do I have to play the game? In the case of Black Desert Online, it doesn't really have a good virtual world. And I can provide you many examples if you guys need that. But is the gameplay for itself or its own, you know, on its own sake, on its own merit, is that enough for me? It isn't, and that's why I don't play the game. Same thing with Elder Scrolls Online. I think that the immersion in the game is frankly severely lacking. So now that that's my personal kind of lore perspective of it, then it comes down to, okay, is the gameplay fun enough or inventive or exciting enough or fun enough that I don't need to worry about all the world stuff? It rarely ever is, because it's pretty hard to have a game that feels so damn fun that you ignore the story. Jedi Academy, once again, Limpos, another example. That's a game where, I mean, sometimes I can't even tell you what the hell's going on in the story because it's so simple and so silly. But I don't really care because I just want to, like, chop people's arms off with my lightsaber. You know what I mean? So, like, past a certain point, I think many people won't care as long as the gameplay loop is good enough for them. I just think that my problem is that I've played some great games. And so Black Desert Online, for me, doesn't even tickle, like, an inch of my desire with gameplay aspects. It's all show and no substance. There's no real mechanics in that game. It's just all animations and fancy graphics, and it looks nice. But is it really that deep from a gameplay perspective? I don't think so. All right, I've got one last question, or maybe a couple more. Let me get a couple more here, and then I gotta go, guys. I see some people asking you about Guns of Icarus from time to time. I was wondering, are you going to cover that game anytime soon, or do you own a copy of the game? I will cover Guns of Icarus because I like Steamwork type games, or steampunk type games, because I like flying around on a ship. Think about it. Flying around on a big ship is all I've been asking for in EVE Online since the beginning of the game that I can remember. My biggest criticism with EVE Online, and people ignore it because they just want to be triggered by my other criticisms. My biggest criticism with the game is that if I have this giant ass ship, why can't I have a bunch of other people on my ship? That's essentially my criticism. And so with games like Guns of Icarus and Rest in Peace, the game that we just recently covered last week, why am I forgetting the name of the game? It was based off of, I think, in large part, Guns of Icarus. But it was a game that had the whole, why am I forgetting the name of this game? We literally just talked about it last week. That's how you know I'm getting tired. when I can't even remember something from last week. Anyway, we covered another game that Worlds Adrift. Worlds Adrift. Sorry, I could not remember Worlds Adrift. But Worlds Adrift and Guns of Icarus, things that I like about these two games in particular, and rest in peace, Worlds Adrift, is specifically the aspect of manning a ship together. It's a cruise ship, right? And you have to man it together. That's just part of the game. And I just think that that's such a genius idea of making community, or at least social interactions, must. You need to work with people if you're gonna operate on a ship. And so more games that operate with that kind of framework, I think, are very interesting. You know, maybe turn your ship into a hub, a social hub, that you can do so much with it. And the next thing you know, you can bring it to people. You can bring other ships to other people. You can create content. And think about that. It's not just like you're going to PvP this ship versus this ship. It's all my friends are on this ship, all my guildmates, the way that we built our ship specifically, all of our shared experiences, and also our time spent together and our fun, experiences. Versus this other thing that's the exact same thing, except they're not the same thing as each other because they're different groups, right? They're different people, they're different backgrounds, whatever else, right? But when they meet, think about how much interaction goes on. Not only are the ships interacting, the players are interacting. Maybe mechanics of the game are interacting. Commerce, conflict, friendship, guilds and that sort of thing. It's kind of like, I've always liked that idea of the whole, a ship as your hub, I guess. Did I talk about Final Fantasy XIV? Yeah, I did actually. I talked about how it's doing pretty well population-wise compared to other games. All right, I think that's fair enough. No more questions are being asked, so I'm going to go ahead and end the podcast there. I want to thank everybody for taking the time to stop and watch today's podcast. It was episode 38 of 6 Pixels Under. We talked about a lot of MMO topics today, which I know people are happy about. I'm trying to get into more rants concerning MMOs because do I cover current gaming news? Sometimes, but really it's just like whatever interests me, and I don't like forcing myself to be interested just because it's like a big news topic. Because I mean, I have my particular area of interest and also my particular area of I would say expertise, and it's not everywhere. It's just particular aspects, and so I'm making it a habit. Hence why we came up with the MMO Roundtable to talk more about MMOs on a weekly basis. So hopefully you guys have enjoyed that today, and will enjoy that in the future. Again, thank you for watching as always, and I think it's reached the point to where I will go ahead and say goodbye to you guys. I can't wait until this airs on YouTube. Well, Limpos, I mean, people are sensitive, so I wouldn't really worry about that. I mean, you and I talk together privately, so I'm sure you and I know what our interactions are like. If other people think we hate each other or they hate you because you are vocal, then, I mean, they're probably not really meant for this community anyway. Anyway, I'll see you guys later. Peace out, and here's my music.